Chapter 151 Astrology. Whoosh! Outside Mount Olympus, the void shook for a moment, and the next instant, four deities flew out from it in succession. Previously, due to the skirmish with that unknown entity, the group was no longer at the location where they had entered before. Because the phantasmal spirit realm corresponded one-to-one with the mortal world, they appeared not far from the outside of Mount Olympus. Huff! We finally made it out. Zeus, if you hadn't forcibly broken through the realm barrier, even with it suppressing us, it wouldn't have been this intense. Taking a deep breath, Poseidon was the first to repeat Zeus's mistake, which caused the golden-haired deity some annoyance. Is that so? You might not be aware of what that place was. It was the domain of the primordial gods, and even by doing nothing, there was no telling if we would encounter danger. Poseidon, I can forgive your ignorance, but today's experience should have made you realize the reality of our situation, right? He retorted casually, feeling an even stronger sense of urgency. About the several reclusive ancient gods, Zeus knew not much, but compared to the twin gods of the Dark Night, there were at least some records of this lord of the spirit realm. Rumors had it that his power was not strong in itself, merely possessing many powerful divine artifacts. However, rumors are always unreliable, and without a doubt, based on today's encounter, at least he was a deity similar to Mother Earth, yet he seemed not to be friendly towards the deities of the present world. The suddenly opened realm barrier, the life form full of hostility toward the deities, and the innate suppression of the barrier itself. Although if he hadn't tried to forcibly enter the third layer of the spirit realm, the suppression from the barrier wouldn't have been so intense, but it was still not a good sign. Perhaps, after an eon had passed, that primordial god born at the dawn of creation was no longer satisfied with living in seclusion, like the twin gods of the Dark Night who wanted nothing to do with worldly affairs. Instead, he wanted to intervene in the world just like Mother Earth. It seems that at tomorrow's celebration of the division of the spoils of victory, he too needed to make a statement, attempting to reach out to this deity in the name of the Divine King. If it was a visit known by all the gods, it should not result in too dire an outcome, right? Tomorrow we shall gather all the gods, and in their presence, announce the establishment of the new divine court. The terms I've agreed to with you before will also be communicated to them in a more reasonable form, he said gravely, looking around at those present, especially his original second brother. Although still somewhat reluctant, Poseidon, along with Hades, nodded in agreement. Since that's settled, let us, His expression changed slightly. Zeus turned to look at the place from where the four had just left the spirit realm. At first he was a bit on guard, but then relaxed. He thought perhaps the life form from the spirit realm was pursuing them again, but instead, it was a familiar figure in red. So, had she just been watching from the side? Golden Mane, have you been beaten up again? The voice arrived before the person did. With a ripple of magic, a red-dressed goddess emerged in front of the four deities, followed by a being with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a horse. An unexpected combat, nothing more. We could say it was a draw, but why are you here? Feeling somewhat embarrassed internally, Zeus did not show it. He put on a brave face and introduced the somewhat perplexed trio to the goddess in front of them. Hecate, whom I've mentioned before, the grand sorceress who prepared potions for me. Of course, she is now the goddess of the magic net. She is proficient in potions and witchcraft and, besides, possesses an astrology akin to prophecy. Astrology. The words Zeus spoke earlier were not taken to heart by several deities. They were powerful gods themselves, but astrology was different. In the original myths, deities like Phoebe, Themis, Gaia, and Apollo had all held sway over the oracle stone tablet at one time or another, so prophecy was considered a relatively common ability among the gods. But now things were different. The first and second generation titans were one thing, but some third generation titans, or gods like Zeus who had emerged in more recent years, had never witnessed a true prophecy. They only knew, directly or indirectly, that some of the primordial gods held powers related to fate, and that the succession of power among the early divine kings was indeed influenced by destiny. Therefore, they harbored a certain dread and yearning towards prophecy. What an esteemed guest indeed! Olympus welcomes your arrival, Princess Hecate. Zeus's elder sister Hestia replied with a gentle smile. She hadn't thought too much about it. Long ago, despite never having met her, she had already taken a liking to the goddess who had helped them escape from the belly of their father. Tomorrow is the day of the new king's ascension and the celebration with all the gods. Given that Zeus once received your aid, you should have a place at this feast as well. A celebration, Little Chiron, what do you think? Initially here just for amusement, Hecate was indifferent about staying or leaving after witnessing the event. She had previously gone to the spirit realm to teach a new apprentice, and also because of what the stone tablet said, there might be something to comprehend. She already knew what it was, but the cycle of life and death's power was too profound. Hecate had merely noted it down. As for the former reason, now that this hospitable goddess had extended an invitation, whether to waste time here naturally also depended on whether the little apprentice wished to stay. Since the noble highnesses invite me, I have no reason to refuse. Faced with Hecate's question and the gazes of 4 powerful deities upon him, the centaur promptly agreed. Honestly, his opinions were a facade. If this newly acknowledged mentor didn't wish to mingle, he would have declined decisively. Then let's go, Golden Mane. Do you have a place to stay here? Seeing her apprentice got her hint, Hecate nodded in satisfaction and then turned to ask Zeus. Yes, we do, and you can actually call me Zeus. Zeus nodded and was about to give her directions when he suddenly stopped. Come with me, it's over there. I'll show you the way. A thought struck him, recalling astrology, and Zeus changed his mind. He led the way for Hecate and Chiron to an unoccupied divine palace on Mount Olympus. This is the place. Not too shabby, right? After parting ways with the other 3 deities, 2 gods and a horse landed outside a palace built on a flattened area halfway up Mount Olympus. Zeus spoke with a hint of pride. The Cyclops were the finest craftsmen but not strong warriors. After forging divine artifacts for Zeus, they were put in charge of constructing the buildings all over Olympus. In terms of skill, they indeed reached the pinnacle far beyond ordinary people. Compared to the divine palaces that Zeus had seen over the ocean, these were undoubtedly much more exquisite. Mediocre, the builders are good, but the style lacks innovation. I guess the designer probably didn't have much talent for art. Hecate commented offhandedly, and although she had already guessed these palaces were probably designed by Zeus, she didn't care if he felt embarrassed. All these palaces of the gods look the same, thinking a change in relief and addition of a column makes it a new style. Truly uninspired. Is there anything else? If not, be quick and leave. With a wave of her hand, Hecate showed no interest in making further conversation with Zeus. Although he knew that the goddess before him was not targeting him specifically, as she was the same with most deities, Zeus still felt somewhat uncomfortable. But there was nothing he could do, after all, he was the one in need of favor, so he chose to overlook it. Moreover, there was no conflict of interest between them, and Zeus, at least for now, didn't care about such trifles in speech. Remembering the purpose of his visit, his gaze darkened for a moment. Although he was prepared, he did not know what result he would obtain from Hecate. It might be good or it might not, but either way he needed to know the outcome. Glancing at Chiron, the centaur beside him, Chiron immediately understood his intention. However, he did not make a decision on his own and instead gave Hecate a cue. Go ahead. I'll listen to what he has to say. Yes, teacher. Seeing that his newly acquainted teacher showed no objections, Chiron quickly left the vicinity. Speak, what is it? Casually turning the earth into a chair, Hecate sat upon it and asked Zeus. I guess it's either about witchcraft or astrology, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't come to me. After a moment of silence, as if he was organizing his words, Zeus finally, hesitantly, asked, I heard you say before, astrology can foresee the future? Raising her eyebrows, Hecate straightened her body and looked at the deity before her. So you want to know what, exactly? Like the ancient legends, whether or not you are the eternal divine king. Recalling the stories told by the Oracle Stone Tablet, the previous two divine kings had fallen due to prophecies of the ancient gods. Could it be that it was now her turn, and the third prophecy was to unfold today? This piqued Hecate's interest greatly. Divining the future of a divine king, even with his consent, was a decidedly challenging task. But thinking about the significance of the act itself, she felt as though she was personally crafting history. Perhaps, millions of years from now, the gods would still remember that Hecate foretold the fall of a divine king on Mount Olympus. No, you misunderstand. Shaking his head and seeing the slightly disappointed look in the eyes of the red-haired goddess before him, Zeus declined. Prophecy is a shackle. The fates of 2 generations of divine kings have already proven this. How could I willingly place it upon my own neck? Then what do you want to know? Feeling somewhat disinterested, Hecate asked nonchalantly. After hesitating for a while, under Hecate's increasingly impatient gaze, Zeus finally spoke. Let's talk about the divine king later. For now, I just want to know. Recently, my wife Métis became pregnant. I want to know, what kind of achievements will the child in her womb have in the future? As night was about to fall, the illumination became somewhat dim. In front of Hecate, Zeus's features were a bit unclear. She could only hear his voice as if it was coming from afar. I mean no offense, but as a father, it's difficult not to be concerned. Boom! As night approached, a dim glow spread over the Mount of the Gods, enhancing the sanctity and tranquility of Mount Olympus in contrast with the celestial phenomena of the outside world. Yet suddenly, a thunderous boom resonated above Mount Olympus, capturing the attention of numerous deities, who then promptly disregarded it. This was not something that surprised them. Most assumed it was Zeus and his brothers arguing for the throne. In fact, they too were eager to know what the outcome would be tomorrow. After a long while, when the cloak of the Lady of Night fully shrouded the sky, Zeus walked out of the divine palace with his usual demeanor. As if nothing had happened, he casually summoned a nymph. After she bowed respectfully, the future divine king gave her a nonchalant order. The celebration feast will soon begin. I have heard that Themis, who presides over the laws, is just and strict. I hope that tomorrow, she will come to witness me ascending as the new king. Go and invite her. Tell her that if she is willing to come, I would like her to serve as the adjudicator in the new divine court, to judge the right and wrong, and reward and punishment of all things in the world when I am unable to decide. I believe all gods will trust her judgment. Yes, your Majesty. With a slight bow, the nymph immediately went to fulfill the command. This had been decided long ago, and had there not been a delay, Zeus would not have arranged it now. With all matters settled, he gazed towards the western sky, lost in thought. The Father God took his sister as the Queen of Gods, and as his successor, I should learn from his example. The god of the ocean's lineage is still too powerful, and the ancient sea god no longer concerns himself with affairs. As a qualified divine king, I should not give them the chance to grow stronger. And then, yes, and destiny too. Maybe this is destiny's choice. The Queen of Gods should be taken by a deity with more potential. Finally, after a period of silence, as if convincing himself with these seemingly reasonable thoughts, Zeus stood for a while before turning around and heading towards his palace. Tomorrow would be the day he became divine king. On such a crucial day, he could not afford to be late. Chapter 152, Two Roads. The night gradually enveloped the land. Atop Mount of the Gods, the deities were about to witness the birth of a new king, while beneath the silence of the night, the shifting tides of the origin sea at the turn of the era concealed many secrets unknown to man. Thousands of miles away, on a high mountain beside the Delphic Great Plains, two figures quietly watched the humans who had survived nearby. Those were the Silver Humanity. They had endured many hardships, yet had miraculously survived. Struggling against the calamitous climate, they were probably unaware that before long, they would be erased by the new king. The earth had no need for them, and the gods loathed them. Perhaps it was as Mephisto, the once leader of the Silver Humanity, had said, Let us all die, or let them all listen to us. Now the one who spoke these words was working towards the latter, but the remaining silver humanity was about to live out the former. Unlike the golden humanity, they hadn't managed to leave any relics to proclaim their existence. A bunch of humans. Is that why you brought me here? I really don't see anything worth watching. The figure concealed beneath the black dress was somewhat hazy, her tall form unseen by anyone, riddled with mystery like the night itself. Standing by Lane's side, Nyx's attitude was as usual. There is nothing worth watching right now. Rubbing his temples, Lane felt somewhat exhausted. During the day, he had fought 2 primordial gods in succession and then opened up Samsara. Not long before, he had also secretly observed a special change. So although Lane's divine body had recovered as usual, even better than before because of the birth of Samsara, he still felt somewhat listless. Nevertheless, he had long invited Nyx out for a walk after a long time, preparing to thank her for her biased actions before, and incidentally to understand why she had done so. But it will be different in the future. You feel it too, don't you? Because of the recent battle, shackles for all deities will soon descend upon this world. Soon, the earth will reject divine power, and other places will also be restricted to varying degrees. Even gods cannot resist the world itself and can only choose to comply. And with the loss of divine intervention, at least direct intervention, in the future Third Age, mortals will be the masters of the earth. Under his black robe, Lane couldn't help but marvel at how useful Nyx's previous gift had been. As for the current laws of the world, hiding in history wasn't very effective. After all, from the world's perspective, the past and present weren't much different. But secrecy was different. This black robe, woven from the fabric gifted by the Lady of the Night, concealed his presence very well. As long as he did not use divine power, he would not be discovered. Luckily, the gods would soon be unable to use their divine power on Earth as well, so in this sense, everyone was not much different. Speaking of which, I'm actually a bit curious. With a smile, Lane turned to look at Nyx, whose face was indistinct and changing. What was your reason for deciding to stand with me before? When the spirit realm and the realm of Lightless collided, Nyx was there by the sidelines, which Lane keenly noticed. If she were there to help the Lord of Darkness, she could have intervened directly, and probably the Divine King would have had to hastily depart without much conversation with the good children. Since she didn't act, there was only one explanation. She intended to block Erebus's assault for him, but seeing that he could handle it, she didn't interfere. Yet Lane truly couldn't understand. Did she have any reason to help him? Ha! Do I need a reason for my actions? With a disdainful laugh, Nyx then denied. Only you and Erebus would count out everything so clearly. Besides, I was just there for fun. A clash of great divine power is after all only the second such instance since the creation. Nodding, although Lane didn't quite believe it, he decided not to pursue the matter further. After all, he had been prepared for the whims of a chaos deity. And just as Nyx said, during the struggle at the end of the First Age, the Titans thought they were the main force, but it was Gaia, the Mother Earth, who fought against the sky, who was the main power. But back then, the Lady of the Night didn't have the time to go to the Earth to watch the battle. Perhaps she really did just want to watch the drama unfold. However, thinking it over, Gaia had been the real agent of action in 2 ages and yet had never gained any benefits from it, which was indeed rather unusual. Sometimes Lane didn't feel much like targeting her. But there was no helping it. However pitiable Gaia was, she was all too easily influenced or acted on whims, and he had to respond accordingly. His choice to come here had to do with checking if Mother Earth had already fallen into a brief slumber. He still needed to pick a suitable candidate related to the branch of the golden apple tree. All right, then I'll just assume you were here for fun. Even so, to thank you for not standing against me before, I still want to share an interesting discovery with you. Shaking his head gently, Lane spoke about something he had contemplated for a long time. Nyx, did you know? Long ago, I've been thinking about where we fall short compared to complete great divine power. You have to think about that? Don't you know everything? With a light snort, the Lady of the Night said, Apart from maintaining the stability of personality, where else could the difference be? The darkness is indeed sufficient, your spirituality, and even the newly born samsara are now enough to support the authority of the great divine power. But if you forcibly ascend, you'll end up like Tartarus, losing the will of personality. How is that any different from death? Lane nodded, just as Nyx had said, the great divine power is the law itself, and the reason they are not complete is that their will cannot permanently merge with the origin without being assimilated. Yes, we need to allow personality to blend with the law without being affected, but we can't do that now. However, I have thought of a possibility. Perhaps this can compensate for our deficiency in this respect. Looking towards where silver humanity was located, Lane stretched out his hand. Two humanoid phantoms slowly emerged, one wrapped in divinity, and the other without anything. Nyx could tell that he was using this to represent deities and mortals.
Humans.
Is this why you invented witchcraft? She asked offhandedly, as the source of the magic net was crystal clear to the divine powers. Thus the origin of the so-called witchcraft was naturally known without asking. One could say that, but so far, it's still far from achieving my purpose. Gently nodding, Lane continued, authority is a part of us, but perhaps our perspective is too high, so even when we wield it, we don't truly understand every bit of it, and that is where our deficiency lies. From the perspective of a god, we will never truly understand it all. But if we can experience it from another perspective, perhaps we can fill that deficiency. He slowly clenched his 5 fingers, and the 2 phantoms disappeared. Because of the unknown, the law affects personality. But if you understood everything, would that problem still exist? After a brief silence, Nyx thought to deny this statement, yet found some sense in it. She realized that she perhaps did not understand the darkness as well as she thought she did. It's like a person not understanding the structure of their own brain, the flow of their blood. They know how to use it better than anyone else, but not the internal principles. So what are you going to do? Not become a deity, use that samsara of yours? In the end, Nyx was still not optimistic about it. Not exactly, after all, this is just a conjecture, and in the current world, there is still no way to become divine without relying on any external forces, so naturally, I would not engage in a futile effort. Moreover, the world is rather dangerous now. No matter how I think about it, I wouldn't make such a decision. Shaking his head, Lane wasn't ready to do such a thing. He gazed into the distance, pointed at silver humanity, and said slowly, but that doesn't stop me from making some preparations. I have prepared 2 paths for them. I will select some among them who are excellent but not excellent enough, and grant them the opportunity to become divine. Of course, that's not what I want. I just want them to become a benchmark, to tell those truly potential beings that mortals can become divine. Desire is the origin of all things, the driving force of civilization's progress. Even I do not think my wisdom is omnipotent. Lane spoke calmly, concluding, I will create opportunities for them, then wait for them to inspire me. They become sacred, and I advance further. That's reasonable, isn't it? It sounds like it. Indifferent, yet Nyx nodded anyway. Since you see hope in this, give it a try. Contrary to what Lane expected, Nyx found the process itself might be a little more interesting than whatever advancement it might lead to. She was also curious to see what the 2 paths Lane mentioned were. Certainly, they wouldn't be the current method of directly granting godhood. After all, bearing godhood requires qualifications. For deities with immortal essence, their qualification, even if it cannot bear a powerful godhood, at least allows for becoming an ordinary true god. That's the lowest threshold for an innate god, but it's different for other beings. The excellent but not excellent enough humans Lane spoke of might not have that ability. But the birth of the new humanity is probably soon. Your influence on fate is growing. Perhaps the next generation of humans will come faster, and go faster too. Behind the veil of constant change, Nyx smiled a little, unknowingly. As the tri-phased incarnation holding sway over destiny, she had a somewhat vague understanding of the future. Humanity would be created and destroyed once more, an event that should have occurred a millennium later, but is now being accelerated. She would just wait and see what interesting developments could happen among the future humans. Chapter 153, Drawing Lots. The following day, atop Mount Olympus, the tense atmosphere of the past 10 years gave way to a cheerful ambience that lingered in all directions. Although the celestial phenomena were still terrifying, under the divine power of the gods, the surroundings of the Mount of the Gods had returned to their former state. Except for the weakened sun that had temporarily lost its controller and no longer moved, everything seemed the same as usual. Standing at the entrance of the great hall, Zeus looked at the goddess who had finally arrived and breathed a sigh of relief. Though he was very confident that she would not refuse, nothing was certain until the dust had settled. After all, there had been little contact between them, and despite not having shown it outright, Zeus always felt that Themis had some opinion of him. If she had not come, and he could not persuade another ancient Titan god to stand with Olympus, many things could have become very troublesome afterward. Welcome to your arrival, the just adjudicator, the respected Princess Themis, my dear aunt. Your presence adds a touch of luster to Mount Olympus. With a jubilant smile on his face, Zeus stepped forward. He opened his arms as if he intended to give the goddess of justice a warm embrace. However, Themis slightly shifted to the side, avoiding the closeness of her nephew. All right, there's no need for such courtesy. I did not come because of you, Zeus. I am simply fulfilling the duties bestowed upon me by my godhood, to deliver just judgment to all spirits. Her expression was cold. From their last encounter in the spirit realm, Zeus hadn't left her with a good impression. Throughout the years, she had seen that he was also quite close to two goddesses. One was Eurynomé, whom she had met before, Metis's sister, and the other was a goddess in black rarely seen, seeming to reside upon the stars. However, compared to the former, the latter, owing to her father's neutral stance in the Titanomachy, did maintain some distance from Zeus. Metis, isn't she your wife? As the future king of the gods, you must not do anything to make her sad. Themis had simply been warning Zeus not to be too promiscuous, but as soon as her words fell, she saw the color of Zeus's face suddenly stiffen. She has been feeling unwell lately, my lady. Perhaps she was frightened by the power of the Father God before, as her divine power is not that strong, so she did not come to the feast today. Please come this way, my lady. You and my foster mother are the only two ancient Titan gods here today. His tone somewhat stiff, Zeus managed to smile and turned to walk toward the palace. Frowning slightly, Themis hadn't expected such a severe reaction from Zeus. She had only intended to caution him against absurdity. But after all, it was someone else's business, and whatever he wished to do had nothing much to do with her. So Themis said no more and simply shook her head slightly, proceeding towards the palace as well. With the goddess of justice entering the great hall, the deities atop Mount Olympus had mostly arrived. Earlier, under the escort of a goddess, the god of the ocean, still semi-conscious, returned to his divine palace atop the encircling river, where the environment was more conducive to Oceanus's healing. The furious tides of the East Sea brought him waves of pain with each moment, and only when he awakened could he mobilize his divine authority to quell them. Therefore, only the primeval water goddess remained to witness the succession of the new divine king. The sun god Helios, however, had been roused by the rapidly empowered boiling water goddess, Perse, within just one day and was brought directly to Mount Olympus. He now sat in a corner, looking dejected. He had initially not wanted to come. The heavenly father Hyperion was missing, and the heart of the sun was left empty. Helios preferred to sleep within the sun for a while, but as a former loyalist in secret allegiance, he had to make an appearance. Beside the primeval water goddess, Eurynomé, Pronoia, Tethys, and several other Oceanides with godly duties took their seats in succession, opposite the children of the primordial sea god on the other side of the divine palace. But on that side, Pontus's eldest son, Nereus, was chatting idly with Poseidon, showing no intention of paying attention to the opposite side. They conversed with great enjoyment, and it was unclear who approached whom first. Compared to yesterday's slightly anxious expression, today's Nereus seemed to have returned to his former self. He appeared genial and polite, his conversation eliciting hearty laughter from Poseidon, who was no more than 10 years removed from the world. "This is really interesting, isn't it, little Chiron? This kind of scene is not something you can see just anywhere." Sitting in a corner of the great hall, Hecate casually took a fruit from the table and popped it into her mouth as she spoke. She wasn't referring to the boring feast, but to the diverse array of deities here. Chaos World was always vast and empty, and golden humanity didn't have such complex thoughts. These sights were often seen only when slightly opposing gods gathered together. Next to her, the centaur didn't speak. In fact, he felt he shouldn't be there. Everyone coming and going around him was a deity, and he was the only one who looked peculiar, being a demigod. His large stature made him particularly conspicuous. The passing gods cast strange glances at him, some as if evaluating a rare object, others simply in disgust, which made him feel somewhat uneasy. "Don't mind them, they're just stronger than you and look more normal. It's no big deal. If anyone dares not to accept this and comes to me with their nonsense, I'll pin them to the ground and beat them. Anyway, with Golden Mane not intervening, there aren't many who can stand against me." Hecate waved her hand nonchalantly. In her eyes, there really weren't many experts in Olympus now. Apart from the family of Zeus, there was only Thetis, the original goddess of water, who was a bit more formidable. The rest were just ordinary deities making up the numbers, so much so that the goddess of magic with her intermediate divine power had actually become top tier here. And among those who paid attention to the centaurs, clearly none of the above-mentioned deities were present. Chiron fell silent again. The hearing of the gods was not poor, and many could hear Hecate's voice. However, after assessing the opponent's strength, and although they did not understand what the magic web meant and whether it could fight, they still refrained from causing further trouble. However, this was also why many gods of later generations had not appeared, and why some deities had not arrived. If it were thousands of years later, perhaps the irascible war god would have been unable to control his temper. Time ticked away second by second until, at a certain moment, Zeus walked toward the center of the great hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, the feast is about to begin, but before that, I have a few long-awaited announcements to make." His voice spread, and with the utterance of the host, the somewhat noisy hall gradually quieted down. Standing in the center, Zeus looked around with a smile, eyeing each deity present. "Firstly, after a decade of tough battles, Olympus has achieved the final victory, and the succession of the Divine King will put a perfect end to this. The former Divine King passed on his authority to us, to his 3 offspring. This is unquestionable. And after discussions with my brothers yesterday, in the end, for the sake of our bond, we have entrusted the decision to fate." This was the narrative he had decided on after much deliberation. There was no need for comparisons, no need for a power struggle, as these would only make him appear on the same level as his 2 brothers. Only the choice of fate could reflect his victory amidst a joke. As for whether others would believe it or not, even if no one believed it now, surely someone would in the future. In this respect, it seems that many rulers, both mythological and from later generations, came to the same conclusion. 3 lots symbolizing the sky, the ocean, and the underworld we used to decide the division of status. Under the witness of fate, in the end, I received the best lot and thus, with their blessings, became the founder of the new divine court. No sooner had he finished speaking than, as expected, the hall erupted into an uproar, with the gods murmuring among themselves. Determining kingship by drawing lots sounded like an absurd tale. Some believed it, some did not, but regardless, behind the laughable decision on kingship, it hinted that Zeus and his brothers did not become adversaries because of it, and they could still be regarded as one. 3 powerful deities, along with their gentle yet battle-ready sister, indeed barely qualified to prop up the new divine court. "Silence!" With a soft command to stop the discussions, Zeus's expression turned serious. He looked around, making eye contact with each deity in turn. "This is the final outcome. So if no one has objections to this, then today, I, the King of the Thousand Thunders, son of Cronus, noble descendant of the Heavenly Father and Mother Earth, will become the 3rd-generation divine king here, ruling over all spirits and things in the world. No deity spoke up to object, and the only one who might have caused an upset, the god of the ocean, was not present. In the silence, Zeus raised his right hand, which held a familiar scepter. Triggered by this divine artifact from the former divine king, an invisible force became apparent. It was related to all three deities, but when the other two entities relinquished their attraction to it, it floated straight towards Zeus. Without light flickering or the world celebrating, the new divine king was born silently. The era had completed its final change, and the rules of the present world shifted slightly. At the same time, an invisible disturbance also swept across the world. A new shackle was born, but nobody was aware of it yet. What's this? The gods were somewhat confused, as they felt nothing else, just as if the disturbance had never existed. Zeus was different, though. Through the newly acquired divine authority of the divine king, he understood everything. This was not anything else but the present world's delayed retribution for the destruction caused by the deities before. From now on, when the gods neared the earth, their divine power would tend toward null. When they approached the deep sea, they would retain only 1/10 of their strength. When they were close to the sun and moon or the underworld, their power would also be greatly diminished. In the present world, only atop Mount Olympus would their divine powers be as before. Because this place was the only one in the War of Era transition where, because of a deity's birth rather than damage, it remained undisturbed. Chapter 154 Reward for Merit. Atop Mount Olympus, the banquet paused abruptly due to sudden changes. The deities discussed the alterations in the laws, but soon, these changes were publicly announced by the new divine king. Although the idea of power being limited seemed hard to accept, the gods only briefly debated it before no one had any particularly strong reactions. This was because the weakening of divine power affected all gods equally, even those who had not partaken in the divine war. Just as Mother Earth had been continually weakened before for simply being great in the living world, now all deities were equally suppressed. With everyone limited, it was as if no one was limited. Besides each other, the gods had no real opponents on Earth. Thus, aside from causing less destruction, this restriction seemed to have little effect. Before long, the atmosphere grew lively again, with delightful nectar and exquisite dishes being served at the table, and the banquet was about to officially commence. However, this was not just a celebration banquet, but also one for the allocation of victories and for dealing with the relics of the former court. So before this, the attention of the gods once again converged upon Zeus. Facing the gazes of the gods in the name of the divine king, he first turned his attention to his own family members. Despite the victory, there were still two enemies to deal with. With the greatest enemy, the divine king, gone, the only powerful ally who could listen to his command was his sister. My sister Hestia, who commands fire and protection. Although the war has ended, there are some remnants that have yet to be dealt with. I hope you can travel to the west of the continent afterward and assist the Hecatonchires in defeating the resisting Titan god, Atlas. I admire his loyalty and courage, Zeus said slowly. So if he is willing to serve me, I will forgive his crimes and allow him to become a member of Olympus. Okay. She nodded, as this had been discussed the day before, so Hestia asked as prepared. What if he refuses to surrender? The sky in the west is still falling. That place needs a support. If he is unwilling to serve me, let him stand there in his Titan form, bearing the symbol that split from Mount Othries, and become the pillar that supports the sky. Looking westward, Zeus finally said, East and west. I will wait for him to bow to me on Mount Olympus. Taking the order, Hestia moved aside. The Olympus pantheon was just established, so as the eldest sister, she had no choice but to go in person. Hades, my brother, before you head to the underworld, please do one thing for me. The son of the heavenly father and mother Earth, Crius, the ancient god of meteorology. This sinful titan once tormented the stars and now has opposed Olympus for 10 years. To punish his crimes, please take him down with Poseidon and imprison him at the bottom of Tartarus, so he can never come out again. As Zeus's voice fell, The gods were initially shocked, as apart from former titans, no true god had ever been locked into the abyss. But after a brief contemplation, they fell silent. Imprisoning Crius in the abyss might theoretically cause chaos in the current world's meteorology. However, both Zeus and Poseidon had overlapping and conflicting godly duties with him. If duties are similar, they can be replaced. Conflict means there must be a primary and secondary, difficult to coexist. Besides, the newly born divine court indeed needed to establish its reputation by using an ancient god, and Crius was more than suitable. Of course, I will take care of this trouble. Hades nodded in agreement, and Poseidon, too, was quite happy to deal with the conflicting Titan god. However, before that, the future Sea Emperor continued to focus on Zeus, seemingly reminding him not to forget their agreement. So glancing at his once second brother, although somewhat reluctant, Zeus still sent him aid. This had also been agreed upon beforehand. After all, on the high seas, Poseidon had yet to establish a foothold. Eurybia, daughter of Pontus and the embodiment of the sea's might, your previous act of rebellion in the face of the enemy is despicable. However, my brother has pleaded on your behalf, and your own brothers have always fought for me. As Zeus gazed at the three children of Pontus, he made his decision. If you are willing to go and assist Poseidon, then I, in my capacity as divine king, will pardon your actions and grant you the same rights as other deities. I accept your judgment. Below, Eurybia breathed a sigh of relief, as did her elder brother Nereus. This was the best outcome they could have hoped for. Now, they knew why Pontus chose a life of seclusion. Without his strong backing on the high seas, they could no longer contest the god of the ocean. Thus, changing allegiances was the best option. Aside, the former water goddess Thetis wanted to say something, but considering her husband who had been severely injured and would not recover for a century, she ultimately remained seated. She planned to wait and see what Zeus would do next, as well as await her husband's recovery. This allowed Zeus, who was watching secretly, to breathe a sigh of relief. He certainly did not want to fall out with his nominal foster parents just as he was taking the throne. Zephyrus, god of west wind. With the most troublesome part resolved, Zeus became composed. He looked toward the far end of the great hall, where the four wind gods stood. They were originally loyal to the divine king, but their loyalty was not steadfast, and so, following Eurybius' lead, they had defected to Olympus. Unlike the female sea goddess, however, the wind gods had not rebelled, and the leader among them even earned extra merit, a fact that pleased Zeus and led to their welcoming. You wisely chose victory before the battle began, so I forgive your past. And you, Zephyrus, even reclaimed my sister's birthright divine artifact, the wheat gold scepter, from the former divine king with your wisdom. Somewhat satisfied, Zeus felt that his new divine court needed gods who were not particularly powerful but had no lack of capabilities. I mercifully retain your position as the leader of the wind gods, and additionally grant you the opportunity to contribute more to the world's climate after the god of meteorology was cast into the abyss. Of course, beyond this, you must also serve as my messenger to gather news from the mortal world. Since the power of the gods was restricted, they could no longer easily see through all the mysteries of the mortal realm. Therefore, Zeus also needed a deity to do this for him, even now when he had little concern for it. Thank you for your mercy, your majesty. I will do my utmost. Bowing slightly, the god of west wind felt a renewed sense of his own shrewd and resolute nature. Upon realizing that the former divine king was in a disadvantageous position, he expressed his loyalty to Zeus in secret. Regarding the wheat gold scepter, when Demeter was rescued from Cronus's belly, the power of this companion divine artifact changed day by day, ultimately falling silent like a dead object. To exchange a useless thing for a chance at advancement, Zephyrus felt the trade was quite worthwhile. Apart from feeling terror when the former divine king went on a killing spree, the god of west wind felt his path had always been smooth sailing. Monitoring powerful deities and making choices at critical moments, each time was fraught with danger yet without mishap, as if fate itself were on his side. Thank you, fate, for your favor." With silent gratitude in his heart, Zephyrus was already looking forward to contributing to the current world's climate after his grandfather Crius was cast into Tartarus. Chapter 155 Sacred Stone. Very well. In the center of the great hall, Zeus nodded. He did not know the thoughts of the god of west wind, but he felt that his current expression was truly one of heartfelt gratitude. However, there were still many matters to attend to, so Zeus suppressed the desire to engage in further conversation and signaled for him to step down, then turned to his foster mother. He was well aware of what he had done, so he had to find another way to appease his powerful foster parents. And after fulfilling his promise to Poseidon, this seemed all the more straightforward. After all, the ocean was not something that could be lost twice. It would be up to them to decide who would ultimately gain it. Noble ancient Titan god, emblem of the primeval waters, mother of the sea, you stood by my side in the most perilous times. Though my mother goddess did not come, I still thank you on her behalf for your assistance, he said. Though in his heart the status of the deities of the ocean was not yet as great as that of a once-dead goat, Zeus still expressed his utmost gratitude. Therefore, to repay your kindness, I, as divine king, promise that in the future, I will never, like my father before me, take up arms against the sea, he declared. What? Theseus was somewhat surprised, and the gods were all astir. They were unaware that Zeus had already sworn an oath to the Styx River to persuade Poseidon. In their eyes, the so-called Sea Emperor and Hades were just semantics, like Cronus had once tacitly allowed his brothers to rule their own domains. But now Zeus, in his capacity as divine king, was making a promise that truly amazed them. Yes, as divine king, my word is my bond, Zeus affirmed. Nodding, he seized the opportunity to look towards the goddess of justice standing beside him. My aunt, the revered lawgiver, overseer of fairness and justice, I also invite you in the name of the divine king, he continued. I hope you will delineate order for the new divine court and make impartial judgments when conflicts arise among the gods. Zeus would naturally resolve any contradictions that the divine king could settle. But when truly vexing issues arose, the presence of the goddess of law was equally necessary. Besides, Zeus had two other reasons in mind. Setting a new order for the divine court, although not quite the same as legislation, was beneficial to his authority, an emulation of his heavenly father's past actions. And even if Themis did not truly heed his commands, her presence alone was sufficient to enhance the majesty of the divine court. Though she had never truly acted, Zeus could sense that this goddess, who had seen an immense increase in her origin after legislation, possessed a power far from trivial, nearly at the pinnacle of divine might. I can agree to this, but on the condition that you do not interfere with my reasonable determination of laws, Themis said. Nodding in agreement, Themis remembered the scene she saw during her last visit to the spirit realm and her casual conversation with Lane. Establishing standards for human morality indeed required the assistance of the divine court, and of course, she also wanted to take this opportunity to offer advice to her nephew. However, this would also need the help of the Queen of Gods. This was why Themis had previously taken notice of Métis, as most deities saw this goddess of wisdom unquestionably as the future third-generation Queen of Gods. No problem, I trust your justice, Zeus said, unaware that the first thing the goddess wanted to enact was the order of marriage. Zeus's smile broadened even more. The affirmation of the goddess of law further bolstered the credibility of the new divine court, and Zeus's gaze swept over the deities, finally resting in a corner of the temple. Ah, and you, my friend, master of the magic net, Hecate, he said. Looking towards the red-haired goddess sitting in the distance, Zeus thought of yesterday's astrological outcome. 2 children, a god and a goddess. One born later, one born sooner. Just as Mother Earth's birth preceded the Heavenly Father, so the girl who was born first would surpass her mother. The boy who came later would surpass his father. They would be revered by all creatures and demonstrate their might between the earth and the sky. Upon hearing such a result, what choice Zeus would make was beyond doubt. Although the prophecy did not reveal that a god surpassing him would replace him as the divine king, This was exactly what Zeus wanted. His reason for having Hecate divine the future of his progeny, rather than his own, was to avoid any outcomes related to the divine king. I once promised you the moon, my friend, and now I fulfill it in the name of the divine king. As an additional reward, I also promise you rights independent of the sky, earth, and ocean, for I know you have always disliked being bound, and this is the recompense you deserve. All right, I understand. Waving her hand dismissively, Hecate showed some restraint on this formal occasion. The so-called promise of Zeus held no significance for her. Even though divine power was restricted on Earth, she had little divine power before weaving the magic net. So, with or without this supposed promise, she didn't feel any god could limit her actions. However, after yesterday's astrology, Hecate was now somewhat curious about how Zeus would treat his children in the future. After their birth, would he consume them like Cronus? Indifferent to Hecate's aloofness, Zeus immediately went on to make arrangements for many deities, some he had favored, and some who had proven their merit. Due to the previous changes in heaven and earth, most of the water bodies and mountains on earth were no longer the same as before, and several inland lakes had formed, which were also within his purview to assign. Finally, Zeus looked around and took out a stone. The gaze of all the gods was drawn to it. This was a special stone. It exuded an aura similar to that of the new divine king. Apart from this, the force of life was covertly lurking within, flowing like blood. A sacred, noble rock, and also the most critical contributor to our cause. It once endured the smelting of the great sun, the strikes of thunder, and received Mother Earth's blessing. In the end, it took my place and was swallowed by the former divine king. Its contributions are beyond doubt, and I am grateful for its kindness, thankful for everything it has done for me. This part of history was actually little known. Many deities were unclear about how Zeus had managed to escape when Cronus was still in power. But now, with the narration from Zeus himself, they could not help but admire the reclusive former queen of gods. To come up with such a method to deceive the divine king and have the courage to implement it, she was indeed extraordinary. I will place it at Delphi, the sacred place of Mother Earth in the mortal realm. It contains the power of the golden apple and rightly deserves to be preserved there. Standing before the deities, Zeus slowly spoke. His reason for bringing up this matter at this particular time was not truly to commemorate some stone, for Delphi didn't even have any occupants at the moment. For whom would he place it there? He was merely using the recounting of the past as a way to hint that Mother Earth not only had blocked the former divine king for him, but had also assisted him on his path to escape. Of course, at this moment, Zeus was unaware that Gaia had fallen into a brief slumber. He simply wished to eliminate as much as possible the influence of this active ancient god on current affairs. Beyond that, before his journey to the oracle, he intended to remove the statues of the second-generation divine king and the old gods from that temple, replacing them with his and the new gods of Olympus. He did not know what significance this held, but it did not prevent him from trying. However, Your Majesty, as I understand it, the Oracle of Delphi simultaneously honors 3 deities. At that moment, a deity who had just been rewarded suddenly spoke up. The whereabouts of the former divine king are unknown, and Mother Earth would probably be willing to accept the offering of your sacred artifact, but the creator of the spirit realm might not feel the same. Placing your sacred stone at Delphi, is it something that should be reconsidered? I know, nodded Zeus, already having planned for this. That's why I intend to go there myself. Some of you might have already felt the world that suddenly connected with the mortal realm. Perhaps some have explored it, perhaps not, but I have been there. On this trip to the Oracle of Delphi, I also plan to meet this ancient god and understand matters related to his domain. Chapter 156 Materials. Everything was well arranged, and the gods felt satisfied, so the banquet officially began. The feast lasted only 3 days, not because the gods' sense of time suddenly returned, but because many matters urgently needed resolution. After 3 days, several deities were to set out to address the issues with Atlas and the god of meteorology. After all, the sky was still descending, and the post-war world also required sorting and pacifying. But unlike the past, as the gods began to celebrate, Zeus, despite having become the master of the new divine court, did not linger at the feast. Instead, he returned alone to the mountaintop, staring blankly at the empty sleeping quarters. "My decision was not wrong. This is the best outcome." Murmuring softly, Zeus waved his hand, sealing off the uninhabited divine palace. Unless necessary, he would not come here again. This is the end. Turning around, the new divine king stepped forward a few paces at the peak of Mount Olympus, overlooking the surrounding lands. Although smaller than the former Mount Othrys that once propped up the sky of the east, this Mount of the Gods was only slightly less imposing. Gazing into the distance, the nearby white clouds were clearly stratified, and beyond the heavy, dark clouds and the continuous rain, the divine king could see valleys and basins scattered everywhere, silently bearing witness to the recent devastation. No wonder the world imposed restrictions on the gods. After all, the farther from Olympus, the more severe the disasters caused by the gods were. At this moment, however, Zeus was not worried about these things. He was only thinking about the question he had pondered while facing Cronus. Legislation, stellar realm, creation of life. Over the past 10,000 years, the previous divine king had completed these great feats. Among these three, it was likely that one was the reason for his father God's strength. Originally, Zeus wasn't in a hurry to attempt these tasks, but now he could no longer wait. The suddenly opened spirit realm, the Mother Earth who left after dropping a cryptic comment and has yet to inquire about him, and the Titans who have been indifferent towards him. All this made him feel very insecure. He urgently needed greater strength. If the position of divine king could not grant it to him just yet, he would strive in other directions. The stellar realm, Helios. Remembering the god of sun who had been brought to Olympus but lay half dead, Zeus found himself in a dilemma. He didn't quite trust this fellow who had defected in secret, but he had no one else to call upon. Having the sun chariot might mean that the sun's movements didn't necessarily require the god of sun, but the task would still require a deity with a similar role. Goddesses like Phoebe, the goddess of luminous, and Thea, the mother of light, could do it. But Zeus didn't even need to think about it. These two goddesses would never come to drive the chariot for him. His elder sister Hestia could also manage the task barely. As she mentioned, the divine artifact seemed to have been endowed with a portion of the power of fire by its maker. But by the same token, the divine king could not possibly ask his sister to drive the chariot for him. With a slight change of expression, the new divine king smiled. Turning to look back, he had partly left the banquet in anticipation of someone's arrival. "You have finally come." There, a deity whose appearance was not robust, but whose gaze was exceptionally bright, was slowly approaching him. The son of Iapetus, the forethinker, the wise one. "I did not mention you at the previous victory celebration. Please do not blame me, for there is an important task waiting for you to complete. Once you finish it, I will surely grant you the position and honor you deserve." "It doesn't matter, Your Majesty. I don't care about those things." With a slight bow, Prometheus wore a smile. "What would you ask of me today?" Although not powerful himself, he did not show the reverential deference to the divine king that other lesser deities did. It was hard to say whether this was self-confidence or something else, as those who pride themselves on wisdom were always so. "Ha ha ha ha. That's right. I've heard that the reason life is so abundant on the earth today is because the gods have created life twice." With a hearty laugh, Zeus didn't care about the minor matter and spoke of the history of the past. The first time, the gods gathered together, and life of the golden generation was thus born. The second time, only your father, the Titan Iapetus, and Mother Earth took part. Is that correct? "You are correct," said Prometheus with a slight nod, expressing his regret. 10,000 years ago, the previous divine king commanded the gods to create the golden humanity, making Delphi the origin of material life. Later, Mother Earth ordered my brothers and me to assist our father in creating the silver humanity. Unfortunately, among all creatures, humans, my favorite, have already passed away. Their souls either ascended to the heavens or returned to the spirit realm. And another generation has varied due to Mother Earth's mood at the time. Even today, including Prometheus, who witnessed the birth of humanity firsthand, the gods still believe the distinctiveness of silver humanity originated from Gaia's fury during their creation. However, in reality, although the process was flawed, the result was serendipitously correct. After all, it was her anger that ultimately led Gaia to decide to mix darkness with life, giving birth to the inherently evil second generation of humans. That truly is regrettable. Humans, it is said that it was Cronus, the previous divine king, who first proposed the idea of creating a quasi-god race by combining the powers of all deities. Reflective, Zeus continued to inquire, "So Prometheus, in your opinion, what is the difference between humans and other forms of life?" "Wisdom, your majesty. They are rare beings that possess thought processes similar to those of the deity race." Without any hesitation, Prometheus answered from the heart. "I must say, creating humans may be one of the real contributions that the previous divine king made to the world. Without him, I might not have thought to create such a unique form of life. It's just that he set too many limitations for humanity, so much so that mortals can learn, but not create. I even believe that if they were not subjected to innate influences, they would be even more like the deity race, and might even develop more remarkable achievements that would capture our attention." Similar. Nodding, Zeus seemed to be pondering something. He had learned enough. Looking at the god before him, the divine king finally voiced his request. "You must have guessed my purpose by now, Prometheus, son of the Titan Iapetus, the forethinker. A new era has arrived, and the earth similarly needs quasi-god beings to embellish it. I want to know if you have inherited your father's ability and also possess the power to create life." Stirred, and despite having formed a guess about the divine king's purpose from their previous conversation, Prometheus was still pleasantly surprised. He had been fond of golden humanity before and often lived among them. He also felt compassion for silver humanity and had taught them knowledge. If he could personally oversee the creation of the third generation of humans, that would be ideal. He would create truly perfect humans according to his own vision. "Of course, your majesty. I have assisted my father god in creation and have observed the Mother Earth creating humans. I possess such ability, and I also have a brother who participated in those events and can help me. However," he hesitated for a moment, and although the forethinker was eager to create humans, he didn't want his creations to be short-lived, vanishing like the past 2 generations, so he tentatively said, "But all mortals must one day die, your majesty. Perhaps, in addition to men, I should create women too. This way, they could procreate on their own, without deities having to create them over and over again. At Delphi, my father god once dripped the symbolic force of human procreation onto this stone, and I've brought it back with me. If you wish." "Not so fast. What stone are you referring to?" Interrupting Prometheus, Zeus was genuinely surprised. A stone symbolizing human reproduction. Indeed, there were many things from the past that he was not aware of. Right here, with divine power surging, unlike the one designated by Zeus as a sacred stone, the stone that Prometheus produced was as tall as he was. This stone had once rested at the feet of the god of speech, and then, due to an accidental encounter with well water, it acquired extraordinary powers. Now, it was placed once again on the Mount of the Gods. Life, it somewhat reminds me of the golden apple, yet it's entirely different. Looking at the stone that Prometheus placed before him, Zeus sensed that special force. With it, humans could reproduce, but he did not want to do that just yet. Zeus supported the creation of humans not for the sake of humans themselves. He merely wanted to repeat what his father god had done before. Since it was just an experiment, naturally, there was no need for extra measures. Let's wait for now. Actually, I too thought about this initially. But Prometheus, the proliferation of humans is not urgent. We have ample time to consider the pros and cons. Casually storing the stone away and remembering the existing silver humanity on Earth, those inherently sinful remnants from the previous generation, Zeus said with a smile, "My dear friend, creating humans is not a simple matter. I'll give you 100 years to prepare. As for the materials, I have thought of some suitable items, and I will soon have the materials delivered to you." Chapter 157 Disappearance. The preparation for creating humans was destined to take a long time, so Zeus set the matter aside for a while. He had planned to destroy the remnants of the previous humans. Now, putting them to good use seemed like a fine turn of events. However, compared to the past, the lifespan of the new humans would be greatly reduced. After all, they wouldn't receive the baptism of life itself like the previous 2 generations of humans did, but were made with second-hand materials. This is also good. If what Prometheus said is true, and the humans whose thoughts have not been altered aren't anything special, then they can soon die, and I can then try again, imitating the golden and silver humanity. It's only a few hundred years. I can wait that long, he said. After some thought, Zeus returned to the banquet at the divine palace. He still had high hopes for the creation of mankind. After all, before Cronus, the cosmos had an owner. The previous god of sun hadn't even touched the pinnacle of formidable divine power. The same was true for presiding over legislation, which was largely the work of Themis, with the previous divine king playing a limited role, but creating humans was different. This was first proposed by Cronus, and it was 2 deities who truly carried it out. The master of the spirit realm, the embodiment of Mother Earth. Perhaps there was really something special about humans for these 3 supreme beings to have taken such an interest one after the other. 3 days later, within the palace on Mount Olympus, Zeus said farewell to the gods one by one, watched as his 2 brothers and sister left, and Mount of the Gods started to feel somewhat empty. Iris, my messenger, go and destroy the remaining silver humanity on the earth. Let them return to what they were before they were created, and then bring them to me, he commanded. The one Zeus ordered this of was the goddess of the rainbow, Iris, the daughter of Pontus and the sea spectacles, Thaumas. In the disputes of the past decade, she often conveyed messages between the gods, possessing a speed that ordinary deities could hardly match. Tasking her with dealing with humans was more than appropriate. As for whether she could accomplish it, there was no question. Even gods stripped of divine power possess strength unimaginable to mortals. After all, a godly form is inherently transcendent, far beyond what any mortal thing can match. At your command, your majesty. Answering in a soft voice, the infamous reputation of the silver humanity had already spread amongst the gods, so the goddess of the rainbow, Iris, was not surprised that they were to face destruction. Thus, after a single response, she transformed into a rainbow light and flew into the distance. It's time for me to depart as well. Without taking any gods with him, Zeus left Olympus alone. No matter the result he obtained in Delphi, he preferred to be the sole knower of it, without the presence of others. Soaring through the sky riding on thunder, looking down upon the living beings on the earth, Zeus distinctly felt that the further he was from Mount Olympus, the slower the divine power within his body became. Eventually, when it slowed down enough to be maintained no longer, but as soon as he attempted to get closer to the earth, that sluggishness would intensify again. Is this the shackle prepared for deities by the mortal world? I can still influence the world's climate with authority, but they will be purely natural thunder and rain, not lightning capable of harming a deity. Making a slight judgment, Zeus found that the world's limitation on divine power was not as absolute as he had thought. He could still forcibly exert a very small part of his divine power, shaking mountains as in the past, but then he would face retaliation from the law in an instant. There's no need, he said, shaking his head slightly. Zeus didn't think he needed to violate the law, forcibly exerting power on the earth. Flying mid-air, after a long while, the space in front of the divine king opened up. On the earth below, many buildings from the last era rose up here and there, creations of the Golden Age humanity. Despite thousands of years, they still stood firm. Here we are. Among the many structures, Zeus immediately recognized the most distinctive one. The Oracle of Delphi, a divine creation at the foot of Mount Parnassus, was the world's first temple, built at the behest of the ancient gods. Time had not left a single mark on it. The stone surface was as smooth as new. Even though he felt no actual power, the ancient temple still gave Zeus a vaguely oppressive sensation. It was the presence enshrined within the temple that created this feeling. Let's not mention the previous divine king for now. The other two deities had both left a trace of their power here, becoming eternal statues. Although it was only a trace, when the spirit realm opened to the mortal world, and Mother Earth merged with her true self, these two powers underwent a transformation as well. Has no one come to acknowledge my presence? Slightly disheartened, even having come here, yet still not greeted by anyone, Zeus couldn't believe that Mother Earth was unaware of his arrival. Just as any deity nearing Olympus would be sensed by him, his own conspicuous arrival at Delphi could not possibly go unnoticed by Mother Earth. If she was aware but gave no response, that could only mean she was showing an unwelcoming attitude. However, since he had come, it was impossible to just turn back. Zeus landed directly on the ground. As he neared the earth, the shackles of law tightened further, and he felt somewhat uneasy with this sensation of suppressed divine power. Once this business was finished, the Divine King decided to seldom walk the mortal world. Let's go inside and have a look. Approaching the grand temple gateway, stepping on the bluestone slabs in front of the oracle, Zeus passed by 12 tall stone pillars. The stone pillars were covered in different human figures, landscapes, and skills, some as original as they were, others appearing spontaneously over the subsequent millennia. They depicted how the gods created the beings of the Golden Age, recorded the birth of the first humans, the human king's dreams of the gods, and that half-heard poem. In the end, everything halted at the collapse of Mount Othrys, seemingly symbolizing the demise of the golden humanity. Poems. For some reason, looking at the images etched upon the pillars, Zeus was reminded of the inexplicable intuition he had when leaving the abyss. Once again, he felt as if he had lost something. Somewhat irritated, he attributed this to the unease brought about by his limited divine power. Zeus entered the temple with his head held high and strode toward its heart. Along the way were many intersecting passages leading to various side halls, each with statues of different deities. But he was not distracted and kept moving inward. Finally, in the center of the oracle, Zeus saw 3 stone platforms floating in midair. One was slightly lower, in the middle, symbolizing the Divine King's dominion over the world and the right to grant existence to all things. The 2 higher ones, on either side, symbolized the ancient gods' transcendent nature, granting flesh and soul to all things. However, at this moment before Zeus, only the platforms on the sides held statues. One represented by a vessel of unique shape, the other a constantly changing symbol. But in the center, the Divine King's platform was empty, with nothing on it. Who's there? Suddenly, Zeus sharply turned around. Perhaps due to his suppressed divine power, his senses had also dulled considerably, and it was not until the newcomer entered the temple that he finally became aware of her presence. However, the newcomer had not sought to conceal herself. She was a sultry woman, but Zeus could tell at a glance that she was a nymph born from the woods. "I am Moanda, your majesty." Bowing slightly from afar, the nymph respectfully said, "Before Mother Earth fell into slumber, she commanded me and my sisters to guard this place and informed me that the world would welcome a new ruler. It is indeed my fault for not greeting you in advance." Chapter 158, Ancient Serpent. Asleep, Zeus seized the key point from the other's words without concern for anything else. "Are you saying that the respected Mother Earth has now returned to her essence and no longer bothers with the troubles of the present world?" "Yes." Moanda bowed gently and replied respectfully, "But this is only a temporary slumber. Perhaps a few hundred years, maybe 1,000 years, your highness will awaken from her slumber." She didn't specify an exact timeline, but during this period, she has commanded me and a few sisters to guard the matters around Delphi. "I see. It seems that I won't have the chance to meet Mother Earth on this trip." His expression softened, and understanding the circumstances, Zeus was clear why his arrival was unheeded. Although he was somewhat disappointed that his grandmother had not chosen to withdraw from the world like the mountain god and sea god, a few hundred years was still good. A few hundred years was enough time for him to accomplish many things. "You are Moanda, aren't you? I've heard of you. You once delivered a golden apple to the mother goddess." Regaining his composure, The divine king nodded to the nymph and then continued to inquire. Since you're in charge of the oracle, what about the statue of the previous divine king? It disappeared a few days ago. After hesitating for a moment under the divine king's piercing gaze, the nymph still revealed the truth. Disappeared. Somewhat uncertain, a few days ago was undoubtedly the day the War of the Gods took place. However, the exact truth wasn't that important. Perhaps it was erased by Cronus himself or destroyed along with his demise. Regardless of the reason, Zeus was quite satisfied with this outcome. After the previous events, if it had been up to him to remove the statue of the former divine king, he would have been somewhat reluctant to do so. I understand. If that's the case, you may leave now. You're no longer needed here. If Mother Earth awakens in the future, remember to convey my regards to her. With a wave of his hand, Zeus no longer paid attention to a minor nymph. After she left the temple, he stepped forward and took out the stone he had sealed as the sacred stone. I mean no offense by coming here, but as the new divine king, the sovereign of the earth and the sky, I rightfully should have a place here. Placing the sacred stone on the pedestal that belonged to the second-generation divine king, Zeus held his breath and gazed intently, trying to sense the surroundings, especially the other world that overlapped with the present one. First, nothing changed. However, after the sacred stone pulsed with the rhythm of life 7 times, the boundary created by the primordial gods finally responded. As expected, silently, in Zeus's perception, an invisible portal opened up. Although no being came to greet him, the divine king had anticipated this outcome. After all, the demeanor of the ancient god had not seemed friendly before. Behind the invisible portal, the essence known as spirituality seeped out 1,000-fold, clarifying the divine king's mind. Yet for some reason, besides that, he also felt a familiar yet strange burning sensation. This sensation, is it Helios? He shook his head slightly, not sure, as the sensation was somewhat different from the sun god. Puzzled, he stepped through the portal and silently disappeared within the Oracle of Delphi. When the divine king left, silence once again fell over the Oracle of Delphi. What no one noticed, though, was that as Zeus crossed the portal, wisps of black and white mist drifted out from behind it and settled to the ground. They gradually gathered together to form a long snake, holding a twig in its mouth, which slithered on the ground upon landing. It seemed slow, but as if it had no physical form, nothing could hinder it. When the snake passed through the temple wall and left, the first thing it saw was the recently departed Moanda. Divine King, is this what a true god is? Standing on a patch of greenery and having been ignored after answering the question, the nymph Moanda stared blankly in the direction of the temple. This was not her first time experiencing the difference between the divine and the non-divine. In fact, this was her second time communicating with a true god other than Mother Earth herself. Once upon a time, she had stood by Gaia's side, witness to her union with the primordial sea god Pontus, which yielded a profusion of offspring. Yet, until their separation, neither Pontus nor any of his 5 children had ever spared her a single glance. In the past, when she attended the banquets of the gods as an emissary of Mother Earth, Moanda had felt the sensation of being noticed by deities for the first time, albeit briefly and only because of the master she represented. Just a moment ago, when the divine king mentioned, "You once delivered a golden apple to the mother goddess," she thought she might be receiving some commendation. However, the outcome was that Zeus, preoccupied with important matters, never intended to say another word to the beautiful elf. After all, she was merely a nymph, not a true deity. It's time to go back. I suppose the divine king did not wish to see me when he came out. Gently shaking her head, whether the outcome was good or bad, since the new divine king had come here alone, presumably not wishing others to know his whereabouts, Moanda also decided not to linger. True gods, truly enviable, aren't they? Yes. She responded offhandedly and walked towards the old abode of Mother Earth. Yet, as she took her first step, she suddenly froze. This wasn't another nymph speaking to her. There shouldn't be anyone else here. The divine king had just passed by, and the one who appeared was a strange voice she had never heard before. SSSS. As the hissing sound arose, Moanda dared not move hastily. She could feel something crawling past her immobilized feet. It was a snake, and though nymphs had seen similar creatures before, none possessed the wisdom that this one did. In front of her, the snake turned its head, a branch in its mouth, facing the elf behind it. It seems you think so too. If we can reach a consensus, that would be perfect. Smart, desirous, and allowed by Mother Earth to enter her garden. Such a being couldn't be more suitable. Who are you? Her voice trembled slightly, but Moanda still tried to think calmly. She did not know which deity was behind this being that dared to conceal itself in the divine king's presence, in the sacred sanctuary of Mother Earth in the mortal realm, harboring ill intentions. SSSS. Who I am is not important. What is important is who you are. The snake did not answer the elf's question. Instead, its body gradually coiled. Its neck lifted high, its head level with hers, and its tiny eyes gazed directly at the being before it. An elf, a servant overlooked by the gods, a nymph who desires the nobility of a true god. Is that right? What does that have to do with you? A bit out of character, Moanda clenched her fists tightly. It wasn't because the other had seen through her thoughts. Even mortals yearn for eternity, and there's nothing remarkable about it. Even if the gods heard it, they would simply laugh it off as a mortal's folly. In fact, she was just vaguely aware of something. And sure enough, although the snake's face showed no expression, Moanda felt as though it had just smiled. Of course it has to do with me, Erica's offspring. After all, I can make it happen for you. Answer my question seriously. Do you want to be a god? Do you want immortality? Do you wish to be revered as a king by all your peers? Her heart pounded. Moanda remained silent. Today's events had exceeded her comprehension. She did not know who would dare to voice such seductive words so boldly in the sanctuary of Mother Earth. So, what are you suggesting? What I mean is that you can choose to forsake your old master, to go against her will and eat the forbidden fruit. But from then on, you will gain freedom and a new life. Isn't it worth it? This is exactly what you've always wanted. Her lips felt dry as she thought about the divine king who had just disappeared into the temple. The elf incarnate of the oak seemingly realized who she was facing, but this only intensified the struggle within her heart. The other had the power to do this, so now it was her turn to make a decision. Chapter 159 Memory. Unaware of what was happening behind him, the black and white mist silently swept past him. Zeus took a step forward, crossing through the invisible portal and entering the spirit realm once again. Through the vagueness, he felt as if he had passed through 3 barriers, 2 of which were the ones he had unintentionally broken the last time. Finally, as the chaotic play of light and shadow returned to normal, he found himself standing on ground that seemed paved with greenstone. Looking around, he found himself in an unobstructed clearing. In the distance, a vast cluster of buildings of diverse forms stretched endlessly. At their center, an ancient well, magnified countless times, was placed there. Zeus did not feel any sense of danger, but there was an almost unbearable pressure weighing on his heart. It was like facing his father in the past, unrelated to the strength of power but to an insurmountable divide between him and the other, making him reluctant to entertain thoughts of resistance. That is the well of reincarnation, what I was busily constructing when you barged into the spirit realm a few days ago. At the end of the second epoch, I surely did not spare any effort on it. A calm and casual voice came through, instantly breaking the strong presence of the ancient well in the distance. Zeus turned around and there, a deity who appeared very young sat on a chunk of greenstone. His features were not quite clear, or rather, they were difficult to remember. By his side stood a goddess with lustrous black hair, enveloped in a halo of light purple light. That was the goddess of the nether moon, whom the divine king recognized at a glance. Although she rarely walked in the mortal world, there were still some records of her. Pardon my intrusion, Lord of the Spirit Realm. I apologize for my previous uninvited entry into your domain. Though he offered an apology, Zeus did not place himself in a subordinate position. There might be a gap in power, but the status of the divine king was granted by the world. At the very least, he would maintain an attitude of equal exchange. It is of no consequence, just a trivial matter after all, and you have already learned your lesson. Speaking of which, that young one who inherited a part of the memory of golden humanity surely has a bias against deities, seeing as we viewed them as mere dust when creating them. The tone was indifferent, and unlike the previous generation. If viewed from the divine king's perspective, Lane didn't really have much to say to him. The powers that could be shared in the world were mostly claimed, and he no longer spent most of the time, like in the previous epoch, asleep at the core of the world, helping the spirit realm assimilate source power. The current divine king was of no value to him, and if the deity before him wasn't Zeus, Lane would not even consider meeting him. Perhaps this attitude had been typical of the twin gods of the Dark Knight in their original trajectory. Lane, however, could infer from later records that Zeus could turn things around with faith. As for the specifics of the power, it was hard to say. Excluding the flattery and deification by successors, there had been 2 conflicts between Zeus and Nyx, but they had never really come to blows, so no one knew who had the upper hand. Golden humanity. No wonder he is so opposed to deities. I thought it was your will. Maybe it was Lane's seemingly congenial attitude that made Zeus relax a bit more. Now that the spirit realm encompasses the entire world, all the gods can sense its presence. I wonder if there are many lives like that recent one within the spirit realm. Quite a few, considering how many years have passed. Some of them are hostile towards deities, but most don't care much either way. Seemingly not catching the implied meaning in Zeus's words, Lane spoke indifferently. Of course, I do not particularly care what they think, just as I do not care what they might do. As long as they follow the rules I've set, the spirit realm will not deny any visitor. You can come and go as you please, and if you wish to kill those who come here with malice, that is fine too. Whatever you encounter here is your own affair. That could not be better. The divine king nodded. Having understood the lord of the spirit realm's stance towards the current deities, his visit was effectively complete. However, for Zeus, who had been born just a century ago, there were still many questions he wished to understand. Speaking of which, not long ago, due to my father's doing, the sun suffered a great blow, and the whereabouts of the ancient god of sun are unknown. I've heard that this Titan god once had a conflict with the spirit realm. Lifting his gaze slightly, Lane saw the other's intentions. What he really cared about wasn't the sun but the actual whereabouts of the former divine king who had mysteriously vanished. But Lane did not intend to reveal the upheaval in the abyss. Since the other had openly asked about the sun, he would respond with the sun. There was such an incident. Standing up, Lane revealed a smile that left Zeus somewhat puzzled. Since you're so interested, come with me, he said. After all, you are at least a divine king. Since you're here, I'll give you a gift. Walking on a cobblestone path, the 3 of them moved forward slowly. In the mythologies of later generations in the East, Samsara is an important place and hub for all spirits, but in the world of chaos it wasn't the case. The world instinctively knew this was a good thing, but like the magic net, for something that didn't originally exist in fate, it actually didn't provide any extra favor. Even because it was a divine artifact without a corresponding deity, no one knew of the existence of Samsara in the world. Lane didn't care whether people knew or not. He twisted the light and time of the all-spirit realm, stretching a day into a week. Now, the place had begun to function on a basic level. So, as they approached the well of reincarnation, what Zeus saw were countless souls with lifeless eyes, moving slowly like puppets, leaping into the huge stone well at the edge of their sight. Watching these stiff movements of the souls, an indescribable feeling rose in the heart of the divine king. Intuition told him that he would never become like this, but it didn't prevent the strange atmosphere from affecting him. What's going on here? They seem a bit lively? He asked, trying to make his voice sound normal. Because they have already passed several checkpoints, in fact, this is already the core of reincarnation, Lane said without responding. Instead, it was Liana who spoke. In the outer perimeter, apart from those with strong wills, lingering in the surface of the spirit realm. The souls that are drawn to reincarnation by the all-spirit realm are first cleansed of their memories by one of the three caretakers of the all-spirit realm, the goddess of autumn and end, Erinyes. Although the well of reincarnation can also do this, in that way the memories would be ground down into the most primal energy by the power of reincarnation and integrated into the spirit realm itself. Clearly, the memories of the living beings themselves are more valuable than some energy. Erase memories? Zeus felt a sudden realization. In the past, people only knew that after death souls would return to the spirit realm, but apart from those in heaven who served as heroic spirits, few deities knew the fates of other souls. Most believed that souls would continue to exist in the spirit realm until they were completely exhausted and returned to nothingness. But today, Zeus felt he had discovered a great secret. It turned out that after death, living beings had their memories stripped away and were thrown into this divine artifact known as the Well of Reincarnation. In the straightforward cultural values of chaos, memory is a noble and mystical thing. This is also reflected in the mythologies of later generations and even sparked much exploration among the wise. To them, stripping away memories was an unimaginable punishment. So, did they commit some kind of mistake? He asked, despite only being curious about mere beings. Zeus didn't care about the fates of ordinary spirits. He just wanted to know if the Lord of the spirit realm took pleasure in tormenting living beings. No, they are just about to embrace a new life, Liana said with a calm voice, which was why she was unwilling to communicate with foreign gods. There were few secrets in the outside world about the spirit realm, but they found it hard to understand everything about the spirit realm. We judge their deeds in life, of course, because of different races, statuses, and circumstances. It's hard to judge them as good or evil. Put simply, apart from a few exceptions, those who had achieved extraordinary things among their peers in life, or whose souls had grown stronger, would receive a higher evaluation and vice versa. Then, based on the standards, the other two caretakers of the all-spirit realm will grant them different endowments, deciding the location of their rebirth in the next life. Finally, they step into the well of reincarnation, just like you see. Liana pointed at the souls, saying, they will separate from their previous lives, born from death into a new life. To ensure a gap between two consecutive lives, naturally memories cannot remain. Otherwise, hatred will continue generation after generation, and all living beings will be unable to find release. Chapter 160, The Fall of the Sun. So that's how it is. With a nod, the Divine King felt this journey was truly worthwhile. Samsara determines the birth and death of all beings. The Creator no longer needs to manually bestow souls, as they now derive from samsara itself. Before today, he had not known that such a place existed in the world, let alone the fact that it housed three unknown true gods. What is this? Suddenly feeling the temperature around him rise slightly, Zeus snapped back to reality. Prior to stepping into the fourth layer of the spirit realm, he had sensed a scorching breath. It was a force similar to that of the god of sun Helios, yet distinctly different. We've arrived. Stopping in his tracks, Lane looked down at the well of reincarnation, giving a slight indication. Indeed, below, the predecessor to the well of reincarnation was roughly the size of a normal well of later ages, but after being embedded into the fourth layer of the spirit realm, it could no longer be simply described as a well. It's less like a well and more like an imposing wall. When standing nearby, one could barely discern its curving arc. Even if one flew up into the air, the interior of the well's opening appeared more like a lake, even a sea. Souls continuously drifted into it, yet they occupied only the periphery of this well. Clearly, even if the life on the continents increased 1,000-fold, it would still not be enough to congest the cycle of samsara. However, for the Divine King at this moment, the vastness of this divine artifact's body did not attract his attention in the slightest. At the end of his gaze, a golden light was bound by invisible chains, with misty serpents roaming above and below, encircling it on either side. If it were a deity who had once witnessed the establishment of law, they might recognize that this was indeed chaos that had separated from the current worldly order. The golden light itself did not fear the dark mist. Both were actually of the same existence, but the consciousness that led the golden light was different. Yes, Zeus could sense that the golden light possessed its own will. It was dodging and avoiding, but alas, all efforts were futile. Under the chains transformed from the spirit realm's order, it had nowhere to flee, especially since its consciousness now was more akin to instinctive reactions. Is this a deity? Uncertain, the divine king closely observed the golden orb of light. The power of the sun, the lineage identical to Helios's, the essence of strong divine power, coupled with the question he had just raised. When all these were put together, there was no need to guess the identity of the golden orb anymore. He was the ancient Titan god Hyperion, the son of Heavenly Father and Mother Earth, the god of sun whose whereabouts had been unknown, and of course he was nothing now. His divine body had been extinguished, leaving only parts of his divinity related to his godhood, manifesting in the form of divine authority of the origin. However, compared to the ancient Titan god himself, this symbol of the sun's divine authority was very stable despite its master having lost subjective consciousness and fallen into a coma-like state. The authority remained constant and undying. The power of a deity is irrevocable, severable by none but themselves or the world. Hence, although the mist serpent continually roamed around the golden light, it could do nothing to it essentially. Ancient god of sun, it seems that after the previous cataclysm, he ultimately fell into your hands. Trying to appear nonchalant, Zeus had a myriad of thoughts. The great sun suppressed by the previous divine king, with its deity appearing in the spirit realm and suffering such a pitiful fate, held profound implications. Add to that the time when the divine king conquered the stars, with the master of the spirit realm seemingly intervening. For a moment, Zeus did not know what kind of secrets lay behind all of this. Are you warning me with the fate of this ancient Titan god? A warning? Wasn't it you who just inquired about his whereabouts? Lane didn't look back and retorted. Zeus was somewhat at a loss for words, after all. It was indeed he who had mentioned this matter first. But he had not expected that the Titan god who had disappeared before would appear here in this manner. Watching the collision between the golden light and the mist serpent once again, the changes before his eyes did not satisfy Lane. Around the well of reincarnation, the godhood of the sun was indeed affected, but only slightly. As a result, even the power of chaos could not find the slightest gap to merge with the other. I've said that I would give you a gift, Zeus, and I will not go back on my word. It's just that right now it needs to be dealt with, especially since you've come a bit too early. Speaking indifferently, Lane meticulously observed the golden light before him. The outermost layer was the remaining divinity and consciousness of the god of sun. Within was the foundation of authority, the origin of the sun, and the rules of the current world firmly locked it up, manifesting in the form of godhood. Lane did not intend to break this layer of rules, and it would be difficult for him to do so. Tartarus took an entire era of the outside world to digest the ancient Titan god Mnemosyne, and Hyperion was many times stronger compared to that goddess. Therefore, from the very beginning, he had no intention to take anything away, even if he could summon the Sun Eater to assist. On the contrary, he was thinking about putting something more into it. It seems the power dissipating around is of limited effect. Then let's be more direct. As if no one else was present, he reached out and pointed, and from the clear and profound waters of the well within the divine artifact, a strange essence was extracted. It floated in mid-air, scattered, and finally merged with the mist serpent circling the golden light. So, the next moment, the mist serpent that seemed to have undergone some change lunged forward and fell straight into the golden light. But this time it was not met with violent resistance. Some change occurred, and in the divine king's eyes, the golden light suddenly dimmed for a moment, and then the most central part split open. A bit of the golden liquid flowed out, which was a small portion of the sun's origin. It still refused any contact other than its master under the protection of the powers of the current world. But this time, it had lost the framework known as godhood. Or rather, it had not completely lost it, but it had transformed. Taking a deep breath, Zeus looked at the sovereign in black before him and said with certainty, "What have you done? Have you destroyed the structure of godhood bestowed by the world upon the deity? Yes, as you see, replied Lane, nodding in affirmation. But this is a defiance of the world's law. No deity can stand against the world because we are its offspring. Zeus was right. From the very first era, the divinely enlightened beings used Your Highness as a form of address for each other. Whose Highness, naturally that of the world. But just as God made man and man did not wish to be at the mercy of God, so Lane might be the first deity to defy the world, but he certainly would not be the last. Thus, with a smile on his face, Lane retorted, defying the world, perhaps it is so. So, is that difficult? Chapter 161, The Origin of Sequences. Whether it be godhood or the world as spoken of by Zeus, they both naturally refer to the embodiment of the order aspect of chaos. Therefore, Lane didn't mean to say it intentionally, but rather, before Zeus, successive divine kings and the primordial gods indeed had, to varying degrees, violated the will of the world. However, facing him, Zeus was once again at a loss for words. He didn't know how difficult this was, nor had he any experience in trying. But as for the incident itself, due to never having come into contact with the core of Tartarus and the mysteries of the world, in his mind, godhood was something that couldn't be affected. Deities never die, divine authority is eternal, this is a truth within chaos, as immutable as the equation 1 + 1 = 2. Other than the world itself, he had never seen godhood stripped away by external forces. Of course, the authority of the ancient god of sun still belonged to him. What was really destroyed was only the structure of the godhood, not its very existence. But to the deities, that was even more terrifying. After all, any deity capable of sensing the existence of the source sea, those with more than intermediate divine power, knew what source power was. When it took the form of godhood or a divine artifact, it was the most precious treasure any deity could possess. But when it came into direct contact with the deity itself, it was also the most dreadful poison in the world. It could erode a god's will, leading to the loss of self and assimilation with the law of the world. Fusion with the Tao through the self sounds good, but to fuse prematurely is another matter. If becoming closer to the rules and more powerful comes at the price of losing wisdom and erasing one's personality, then no deity could accept it. At this moment, even though the three deities present were only spectators, they could already see, following the outflow of source power, the mass of golden light gradually starting to twist and warp. The dim will of the ancient god of sun seemed to instinctively sense something. He began to thrash about, trying to dodge the impending crisis, but it was futile. Not to mention he was being restrained by the power of the spirit realm itself with nowhere to escape. Even without the restrictions, it would be a meaningless act. After all, authority and the deity are one and the same. Even if the structure of the sun godhood was slightly damaged, it still remained bound to Hyperion. Other than this world, nobody could strip a deity of the control over its own divine authority, which was supposed to be the innate and noble assurance of a deity's birth. But at this moment, it had become a shackle instead. No matter how the ancient god of sun tried to evade, the leaking sun origin clung to his will like a shadow. Is this what you call a gift? Allowing me to witness a deity's death? Once again feeling deep malice, although the ancient deity in front of him said he had no specific intentions against him, the reality was otherwise. Not making a move earlier or later, but waiting until his arrival to deal with the ancient god of sun. If not to show him, then who was it for? Of course not. A gift naturally needs to have value. Otherwise, how could I offer it? Shaking his head slightly, Lane said slowly, "Continue watching. Life always finds its own way out, especially since I left him an escape route." Narrowing his eyes slightly and seeing that Lane had no intention of elaborating, Zeus continued to watch the changes in the golden light before him. In front of the three deities, the transformations of the golden orb grew more violent. When consciousness came into contact with source power, the concept and laws belonging to the sun also began to pour directly into Hyperion's already unconscious mind. Without order, without logic, if this information were an ocean, then the god of sun's consciousness was a drowning man. He could only passively drink in the seawater, regardless of whether he could digest it or even continue swallowing. And not all of this information was valuable. Much of it was useless. Like a person's memories, knowledge only occupies a small part of it, while the numerous mundane experiences, though redundant and useless, actually make up the vast majority. Under these circumstances, the gleam of the gold became more frantic, desperately trying to escape, but it was all in vain. However, just as the will of the deity was about to be thoroughly integrated, it abruptly stopped. Then, before the three of them, the sphere of light trembled violently and immediately exploded with a resounding blast. Just as I thought. As the sphere burst apart, countless streams of gold, large and small, scattered in every direction. Disregarding the smaller ones, Lane directly seized the largest fragment and the three slightly less significant ones. The smaller three were aspects of the god of sun himself and parts of his authority that had leaked out, while the largest was the more intact divine artifact of the sun itself. This part seemed relatively safe, but that was only on the surface. After all, a trace of chaotic source force that had been merged earlier was inside it. Is this the way out you spoke of? Besides the four major parts, the remaining fragments were lost to the forces of vibrating time and space during the explosion, while others flew directly towards the three deities. Liana paid them no heed, but Zeus reached out to intercept some. Looking closely at the light in his hand, the divine king, who had observed the entire process, roughly understood the principle behind it. Lane had disguised chaos using the breath of Samsara as the opposing order, using it to touch and disrupt the structure of godhood, causing a slight overflow of the origin, which then contacted the consciousness of Hyperion, based on his immortal essence. Ultimately, the slumbering instinctual consciousness of the ancient god of sun, to prevent assimilation by the source power, caused itself to collapse. His consciousness thus fragmented into countless pieces, shattered under the weight of divinity, while the released source power also became finely divided and started to settle down. Yes, this was his only way out. And of course, it is also a gift I am giving you. Nodding, Lane turned his hand, and the largest light spot he had caught disappeared, leaving only three smaller ones. I can't give you the main body of the godhood, but these three you can have. Unlike the rest, which were merely tools Hyperion's instincts used to alleviate stress, these three to some extent embody some of the divine authority of the sun, which I suppose should be quite valuable to you. Indeed, they were valuable but also very dangerous. With a slight frown, Zeus knew these were good items, but he couldn't figure out how to use them. As for Hyperion, the divine king actually didn't care much for this titan he had never seen. Compared to him, Helios, who typically drove the sun chariot, seemed much more manageable. But I can't use them. Any life form that tries to merge with them will inevitably face not only the integration once born by the god of sun, but also the resistance of its original master's will. That's your problem. Use your wisdom, and you'll find a way. He emphasized wisdom a little more firmly. While godhood and power were not necessarily equivalent, it at least represented a minimum threshold. Just remember, don't let too many fragments that originally belonged to the god of sun come together. Otherwise, what might happen, I can't guarantee. Chapter 162 Aggregation and Separation. Zeus understood what Lane meant. Instinctively, as Hyperion's unconscious will face assimilation, it voluntarily fragmented into variously sized divine remnants. This was a life-born survival notion. But similarly, when the essence that overflowed from the godhood split along with it and gradually settled down, survival was no longer the priority, and it would try to seek wholeness. If he were conscious, he would naturally know that once he became whole again, he would face the danger of being eroded by the source power, but under the drive of instinct, Hyperion would not care about these. Therefore, under such circumstances, the divine fragments of the ancient god of sun would spontaneously attract each other. When a sufficient number of divine fragments gathered, a part of Hyperion's consciousness would briefly awaken. As for what would happen then, only heaven knew. After all, a partial consciousness is not a complete consciousness, and it was possible for any emotion to take the lead at that time, and it was highly likely that reason would not prevail. However, judging by his past character, it certainly wasn't going to be any state of peace and stability. Of course, even if he woke up, even if it was just a partial consciousness, it was doomed not to last. After enough gathered, the leaked sun origin would gradually become active again from its quiescence, just not as quickly as when it was complete. At that point, if he did not want his consciousness erased, the ancient god of sun would still have to actively disintegrate himself. Unless he could find a way to maintain his rationality and resist the assimilation by the source power. Truly an eternal torture. I heard you were the first to define death. Now, faced with the immortal gods who once offended you, you also give them eternal torment and suffering. After a brief silence, Zeus tucked away the item in his hand. Regardless, this was indeed valuable. Those earlier, scattered divine fragments were not powerful, with the strongest barely reaching the realm of a true god. But these few were different. The main body of the godhood that Lane took away roughly had the quantity of intermediate divine power and the quality of powerful divine power. These three more significant parts had just stepped into the realm of true gods, and their essence was equally high. From the fall of one whale, life emerges. Although Zeus had not heard this saying, he now had a similar epiphany. A Titan principal god with great divine power had eventually fragmented into what lay before him. Even those earlier divine fragments that fell to the ground were likely to come into contact with life, to be absorbed and harnessed by them. Compared to these few main bodies, those fragmented pieces might potentially resist assimilation by living beings relying on their will, barely able to harness them. Henceforth, traces of Hyperion would be scattered throughout the world, and the mortal world would tell countless legends about him. But he himself, I'm afraid, would never be able to return. After all, destruction is far simpler than repair. To return the transformed godhood to its original form, probably only the world itself would be capable. All right, I've seen what there is to see and said what there is to say, and you should be reasonably satisfied with my gift, so I won't keep you any longer, Lane said, waving his hand to signal that the divine king should depart. He had left two simple paths to divinity for mortals, and this was the first one. The reason for conducting this step in front of Zeus was to prevent any beings among future humans walking this path from being directly erased by uninformed deities out of fear, needlessly wasting his time. Now that the divine king understood how this came to be, he would not cause any trouble because of it in the future. By the way, maybe if I have some time in the future, I'll take a walk on the great earth, and you, your divine majesty, shouldn't have any objections, right? As if he had just remembered something, Lane said with a smile. Just as he said, even if the existence of bronze humanity was brief, he was prepared to take a look. Of course, any deity has the right to walk freely in the world, Zeus answered, understanding that the ancient god before him wasn't truly seeking his permission, and he agreed smoothly. It was hard to tell if he got the answer he wanted, but he had seen enough today. He planned to take a break before dealing with the remaining matters. Passing through the invisible portal, the divine king left the fourth layer of the spirit realm. However, as he watched his departing figure, the goddess of the nether moon, who had been silent all along, suddenly spoke. Your Highness, why don't you capture all the false gods from the outside world and make them end up like this sun? Somewhat surprised, Lane couldn't help but ask, why would you think that? Liana had long looked down on the gods of the outside world, but what she hadn't expected was that she was now entertaining even more radical thoughts. Wipe them all out, she mused, a sentiment bordering on that of a fanatical follower. The false gods of the outside world are always so arrogant and ignorant. Not only does a sinful existence like Hyperion dare to provoke you, but other pseudo-deities are also full of vile deeds. Lifting her head to respond to Lane's inquiry, Liana's expression was earnest. I think that there might be fewer problems without such false gods. That would be quite challenging. With a wry smile, Lane didn't know what to say. In some respects, his most loyal subordinate always had some bizarre ideas. We can't do that yet, Liana. Not to mention the presence of the primordial gods in the outside world. Even without them, a state like that of Hyperion isn't easily realized. The existence of the eclipse and the creation of the sun chariot have given me a clearer understanding of the essence of the sun. but other divine offices are far behind. Shaking his head, Lane opened his right hand. The substantive part of godhood that had been absent before was still there but had taken on a different form at some unknown point. It was attached to a stone sword, forming a state akin to a divine artifact, yet not entirely similar, one that could be separated at any time. Unlike the divine artifacts, and perhaps due to the emotions just before the self-collapse of the ancient god of sun, or perhaps because of an intrinsic warping by a strand of chaotic source force, anyone who used it would, upon putting it down, be cursed with the scorching of the great day. There might be other side effects, and while Lane could probably get results with a prophecy, he chose to leave a bit of mystery as his spiritual intuition didn't issue any warning. Put it away for now, we don't need it yet. Only when a life is born in the mortal realm that accumulates enough divine fragments will they be qualified to carry this authority. Lane was somewhat reflective. At first, he was just pondering how to resolve the issue of immortal deities once and for all. Although he didn't find the answer, in a moment of inspiration, he created this special product. Yet it seemed a curious coincidence. The immortal nature of the gods, the divine authority that's hard to strip away, the will assimilated by chaos after coming into contact with the source power. When these combined, it appeared to birth a special product. A power system akin to one Lane had heard about before his arrival in the chaos world. A sequence system, what separates must unite, and what unites must separate. Such a familiar saying indeed. I had almost forgotten. In a blink, tens of thousands of years have passed. With a quiet sigh, Liana, standing beside, took the stone sword, listening quietly. Lane often spoke of things she hardly understood, but perhaps that was a sign of her lord's foresight. After a moment, his thoughts shifted. Through the barrier between the spirit realm and the outside world, Lane turned his gaze toward the Delphic Great Plains. It wasn't the lone Zeus who left nor the long-slumbering Mother Earth, but rather the golden apple orchard, tended by the maids entrusted by Gaia. There, the orchard was a riot of blooming flowers, with every plant having been nourished by the life vase at one point. Some were the progenitors of certain plants in the world, and most were embodiments of nymphs. However, most of them were not allowed to stay in Mother Earth's orchard and were driven out upon their birth. Before her slumber, Gaia connected this place to the earth, making entry to the orchard as difficult as shaking the earth itself for anyone without her permission. Yet today, a maid granted access by the Mother Earth herself brought an outsider into this forbidden forest. In that place, a snake flicked its tongue, looking towards the nymph who had transformed into an oak tree. Chapter 163, Twin Birth. Hiss! The snake hissed softly. Although it was well acquainted with the world, it was actually seeing the golden apple tree for the first time. It was born in the first era, in the age where life had yet to be split in two. Within that divine artifact symbolizing the origin of all things, nature naturally nurtured the seed of the first plant in the world. It was the seed of all things. If it had continued to be nurtured in the place of its birth, perhaps the moment the life vase evolved into the Genesis artifact, it could have transformed into a deity, becoming a true innate deity of life and plants. The artifact would have been its true form, just as the earth is the true form of Gaia. It would have become half-great, after countless beings walked upon the earth. But as soon as Gaia realized this, she decisively stopped the process. The life vase was her divine artifact, and artifacts do not need thoughts. So, she planted the seed of all things and watered it with life origin liquid. From it, the golden apple tree was born, sharing with it the authority over plants. Have you made your decision? The golden leaves swayed gracefully, and a sound like a silver bell echoed in the wind, akin to nature's purest symphony. The snake looked up at chaos's ancestor of all trees and couldn't help feeling the similarity among the deities. Even a god like Gaia would not tolerate her treasures being influenced by other minds. Thus, the deity that should have been born was strangled in the cradle. Of course, from another perspective, this was also the destiny of the current world taking effect. After all, even greatness that already existed was being constantly diminished. How could it possibly stand by and watch new greatness arise? I have already brought you here. Dodging the question, Moanda spoke softly to the side. The snake knew the tangle of emotions the other was feeling at the moment. After all, until now, the other still worried that the snake only wanted to use her authority to enter the golden apple orchard and wasn't sincerely trying to help her become a god. So, she did not tell the truth. Entering the orchard and touching the tree were different matters. After all, the orchard existed for the golden apples, not the other way around. Therefore, on the golden apple tree there were additional protections. Only those who touched greatness could see the power flowing on the tree. Anyone other than those allowed by Mother Earth to touch it would not only be blocked by this power but would also awaken the ancient gods that had fallen into slumber. No one could take the golden apple tree from Mother Earth's true form. Fortunately, the snake had not come to steal. Yes, I have come. The golden apple tree is indeed a rare treasure in the world. The snake's head swayed, causing the branch in its mouth to shake and the golden leaves to rustle. So we can begin the next step now. The next step, you must tell me what I can gain from this. Gathering her courage, the elf looked directly at the snake on the ground. She could work for the other, provided the reward was equal to the effort. Having been by Mother Earth's side for so long, she had witnessed the ancient god's strength and learned many lessons from it. Of course, the snake's head nodded slightly. Although it always held a branch in its mouth, it seemed to never affect its speech. Do you know, actually as a nymph, you and the golden apple tree are quite similar. In some ways, you are even superior to it. Similar, are we both plants? With a self-deprecating laugh, Moanda thought that if she were even half as important as the fruit of the golden apple tree, the gods would treat her like an honored guest. Isn't that enough? Both of you are plants. You awoke to wisdom, but it did not. So what use is that? There are many beings in the world with wisdom. Once, every human had wisdom, but now they too have turned to dust. The words slipped from the nymph's mouth, followed by immediate regret. She felt she should have been more tactful, but clearly, the snake didn't care about such things. She saw the snake place the branch it held in its mouth on the ground, gently tap it with its tail tip and then smiled at her. That's the purpose of my existence. You both have flaws. Neither of you is perfect. You lack power, it lacks wisdom. You both are incomplete. So what it lacks, you provide for it. What you lack, let it make you whole. Shared existence, twin empowerment. The branch of the golden apple tree originally stemmed from the mother tree. Now, in Moanda's hands, it was reattached to its original place. The snake's body disintegrated, right in front of the nymph elf, turning once more into a fog of black and white, slowly winding itself around the branch. Gradually, as the original break healed under the powerful life force, it began to nurture a new fruit. However, this time the fruit was a bit special. Compared to the golden apple, it should rather be called the fruit of samsara. Anyone who consumed it would experience a mini-cycle of rebirth, and then be reincarnated as a part of the golden apple tree's will. This was actually an impromptu idea. Initially, when it was still uncertain whether a complete cycle of rebirth could be established, this branch was used to enlighten the fruit tree. But compared to a newly born tree spirit naturally close to Mother Earth, clearly a nymph who had betrayed Gaia was more suitable. Thus, Moanda watched the blossoms grow on the branch and made her judgment based on experience. 100 years, or at most 300 years, and it will mature, she estimated. The principal god probably won't wake up before then, she murmured nervously. She was a spirit, transformed from an oak accompanied by heather, having been watered by undivided life origin liquid, and thus took form. But beyond that, she wasn't particularly special compared to her kindred. However, in the future, as long as she consumed this divine fruit, she would become a nymph of the golden apple tree, merging her vague consciousness with it, becoming the origin of all plants in the world and symbolizing one half of life. And as the only deity transformed from a plant, Moanda would naturally become the monarch of all her kind in the world. Unlike her predecessor, the goddesses of the white oak born of Father God's divine blood, the golden apple was the plant itself. Mountains, rivers, lakes, seas, flowers, and trees, A restriction on the birth of the spirits of all things had been lifted in the spirit realm since the Silver Age. Chaos nymphs could now, as in myths, be born from all things. But among all the spirits, those of plants were by far the most numerous. Those of mountains and waters were but a fraction because the former were more prone to amass spirituality and awaken consciousness. Once she took form as the golden apple tree, all nymphs naturally born from plants would become her subjects. Moanda, what are you doing here? Isn't it your day to be at the oracle? A voice rang out suddenly. Ah! Startled from her thoughts with an exclamation, Moanda was shocked by the unexpected voice. But a moment later, she quickly recovered. Covering her chest, pretending to be frightened, Moanda turned around and glared at her friend who had approached quietly. Veda, how could you approach without making a sound? She exclaimed. It's because you were too engrossed in your thoughts. Nothing to do with me, Veda retorted. As a nymph born from flowers, Veda had grown in the shade of Moanda's tree before she became conscious, so the two were very good friends. Has the golden apple sprouted new branches again? I didn't expect a new fruit to start growing so soon after the last one, Veda remarked casually, feeling it might relate to Mother Earth's slumber. Maybe because of their mistress's slumber, the golden apple too became more vigorous. Right, if it weren't a divine artifact of the principal god, I'd really like to pick one and try it, Moanda said, keeping her expression unchanged while agreeing with her friend. She knew no one would believe that a nymph would dare go against the principal god's orders and claim the artifact for herself. In fact, up until now, she still had a tiny bit of hesitation. Although it was just a tiny bit, she felt that if the divine fruit were ripe, she would definitely put it in her mouth. Indeed, I've tasted many fruits, but I still don't know what a golden apple tastes like, Veda admitted, also yearning a little, but without overthinking it. You haven't said yet, why did you come here today? Didn't you go and check on the oracle? Veda pressed, curious. Though the so-called overseeing was just a formality, no one thought that places like the Golden Apple Orchard or the Oracle of Delphi could be damaged. And if they were, it was not something they could contend with. But still, it was necessary to go there. Not all nymphs were harmonious, and there were quite a few who disliked Moanda's presence. It's the duty the principal god left before his slumber. The new divine king of Olympus has arrived at the oracle, and I was naturally kicked out, Moanda said, spreading her hands relaxedly. What was done was done. There was no longer any room for regret. All that remained was to wait. You know it, we don't really matter to a true god. I suppose that divine king intends to place his own symbols in the temple. We can go check it out together in a while, she proposed. The divine king? Veda asked, clearly surprised. What does he look like? Let's go out first. I came here to tell you about this, Moanda urged. I'm telling you, the new divine king looks like. With ease, Moanda captured her friend's curiosity, and together they walked out of Mother Earth's orchard. Behind them, the golden apple tree swayed gracefully. In the crown of the tree, a new divine fruit was growing. But this time, perhaps it would not be a god who would eat it. Chapter 164 Hades and the Sea Empress. Ever since the divine king returned to Olympus, the once urgent passage of time at the turn of the era began to slow. Zeus selectively announced the results of this journey, and the end of the Titan War was quickly declared. With Hestia's help, the three Hecatonchires finally captured the Titan god Atlas. This fearless deity was not willing to surrender, but remembering Cronus's final words before his departure, he ultimately accepted the task of holding up the sky. Thus, after a fall of 6 days, with a thunderous noise, the western sky finally ceased its descent. Atlas revealed his divine true form, and when he merged with the symbol of skybearing, as long as he continued to fulfill his mission, the world no longer restrained his divine power. Hence, under the Titan's strength, the sky slowly rose again, but it could never return to its original height. This did not come as a surprise, for Olympus was born from the forefather of mountains. It was inherently in symphony with the split symbol of Mount Othrys, something Atlas could not achieve. Therefore, from that day onwards, the sky in the east was higher than that in the west, and the god of strength thus earned the praise as the skyholder. On the other hand, after being besieged for 3 months, the god of meteorology, Crius, was finally captured. The now idle Hecatonchires cornered him on both sides and followed Hades to the underworld. Nominally, these two giants would serve as guardians of the abyss, but in reality, all deities knew that Tartarus needed no guard, for it was a formidable barrier in itself. The two Hecatonchires were merely part of the arrangement agreed upon by the brothers who were divine kings, assigned as aides for Hades in his dominion over the underworld. Hades was pleased with this arrangement. He had long known of the Hecatonchires' valor in battle. With their help, Hades easily subdued several deities who had long dwelt in the underworld. For these deities who proclaimed themselves descendants of the primordial gods, Hades was mostly satisfied. Apart from that one goddess of lust who always sought to seduce him, the godhood of sorrow, deceit, destruction, and doom were very useful. Coupled with some nymphs brought from the surface, the framework of the underworld was finally established. Hades appointed Minta, a naiad, as the leader of the sprites and manipulated the waters of the magma lake at the entrance of the underworld, the remnants of a fallen great sun, to form a river of fire. This separated the various regions of the underworld. Lastly, he summoned the incarnation of the river of sorrow, Acheron, the elderly-looking ferryman of the Styx River. On my way here, I saw the underworld lands filled with wandering skeletons and corpses, as well as some spiritual bodies that move between the surface of the spirit realm and the mortal world. I meant to erase them with my authority, but to my surprise, I found that some possessed wisdom and were worshipping the nether moon above the underworld, regarding it as the origin of all things, he said. Since Hades' divine palace was still under construction, with the Cyclops brothers working tirelessly day and night, he could only stand on the vast gray plains and seek counsel from the old man before him. You and I were born one after the other, Charon. The river of sorrow emerged as the underworld welcomed its master. In a way, you are also my brother, he said. So I wish to ask you, why were they born? And do they have any connection to the goddess of the nether moon? Your Majesty, there are countless plants in the mortal world, and even some in the underworld, but does the Mother Earth who created these plants care for each one of them? Standing opposite Hades, Charon replied respectfully. He was not, in fact, a deity of good temper. Charon had once refused all wraiths that sought to cross the river of sorrow, or pretended to agree and then tossed them into the water midway. However, facing someone stronger, the aged ferryman knew what to do. I see, Hades replied, nodding his head, understanding the other's implication. Perhaps these spirits that roamed the underworld were indeed born of the light of the nether moon, but the mistress of the nether moon never cast her gaze down upon them. In the eyes of that powerful goddess, maybe everything in the underworld went unnoticed by her. In that case, from now on, as the Lord of the underworld, I forbid the unwise spirits from entering the fields of truth, Hades decreed. The fields of truth, the name Hades gave to the core of the underworld where he would dwell in the future. Unlike the gods above, his naturally dark godhood did not disdain those beings shrouded in negative energy, but they had to possess wisdom to be capable of communication. So, when the Lord of the underworld made his decision, under the influence of divine authority, the heart of the underworld barred all unwise spirits. From then on, they could only wander the periphery of the underworld and not approach Hades' divine palace. Summon those wise beings for me and then tell them, although I am a god from above, henceforth I will dwell in the underworld, which is also my domain by right, Hades instructed. I will not slaughter them wantonly, but they must follow my order and heed my commands, he declared. Lastly, after a moment's hesitation, the Lord of the underworld added another directive to Charon. I allow them to continue worshipping the nether moon, but they must also erect temples to honor me, as a proper respect to the Lord of the underworld. I will uphold your command, your Majesty, said Charon. Bowing slightly, Charon took his leave, carrying the new Lord of the underworld's will. Ha! Letting out a long sigh and watching Charon's retreating figure, Hades took another look at the nether moon in the sky, feeling somewhat troubled. He once harbored the notion of marrying his own sister because, as the goddess of all that grows, Demeter could bring vitality to the underworld. But now, it seemed, perhaps spirits were more suited for the underworld, and thematically, the nether moon seemed more in harmony with the underworld than the vitality above. However, Hades could not fathom why the powerful goddess of the nether moon would leave the spirit realm to dwell in the underworld and feed on dirt, just as he had refrained from inviting Demeter directly because he knew that few gods from above favored this place. They are not like Hades. No matter how grand the underworld might become, their divine power would not increase in the slightest. Forget it. There's another goddess who gives me a headache, and I wonder when she'll be willing to come out and meet me, Hades mused. He shook his head. In Hades' perception, the presence of the river Styx, the river of vows, was without a doubt. As Zeus became the Oath-Keeper and ascended to the throne, the power of oaths was naturally further strengthened by the world. Hades had to face a reality that even if the primordial gods surrounding the underworld ignored him, he still had two powerful goddesses at his own doorstep. Moreover, by the looks of it, neither of them had any intention to pay attention to him, the newly appointed Hades. It's still better than Poseidon. At most, I'm ignored, while he has to directly face the pressure of the god of the ocean's lineage. He laughed a little, perhaps taking pleasure in his misery. Hades felt somewhat happier. Upon the sea, after capturing the god of meteorology, Poseidon handed him over to his eldest brother. Then, accompanied by several children of the primordial sea gods, came to the ocean. Since the disturbances in the East Sea remained unsettled to this day, he chose the waters of the south as his abode. But here, the first thing Poseidon did was neither to build a palace nor to recruit followers, but to pursue a sea nymph he had only met once. It was hard to say exactly why. After all, this sea nymph was the eldest son of Pontus, the daughter of Thalassa. Perhaps Poseidon did this to solidify the relationship between them and not simply out of lust. In any case, this pursuit lasted for more than a few months. Everyone knew that, if he wanted, Poseidon could capture Amphitrite in a moment, and even the sea nymph herself was aware of this. Yet, she still chose to flee, not because she rejected the marriage. In fact, quite the opposite, she was very satisfied with it. The reason she did this was simply to satisfy her vain heart. The Sea King, appointed by the divine king's brother, chased after her, but she paid no heed, which was something worth boasting about. Thus, she traveled to many places in the great seas over several months, seeking help from every creature she met to escape the relentless pursuit of the Sea Emperor. Of course, as expected, none of those she asked for help had the ability to do so. Hence, Amphitrite continued on her proud journey. What she didn't know was that Poseidon, who wielded control over tsunamis, storms, earthquakes, was not a patient deity. If it weren't for a slight consideration for her father, the Sea Emperor in name only would have already lost his temper. Where did she go this time? He casually inquired, a fortunate spectator nearby. Poseidon didn't really want to engage in such a meaningless act. The desire aroused by her appearance had subsided over the months, and now he was purely going through the motions. However, Amphitrite's actions were somewhat effective. In less than a year, she succeeded in spreading the name of Poseidon across the sea. So, when he went to the sea god Nereus, seething with anger, and received an explanation, he continued the chase game with the sea nymph. The premise was, she'd better not go too far. Your Majesty, it seems that the lady has gone toward the western end. The west? I understand. He nodded and was about to set off again when he suddenly stopped. He turned to look at the nymph, his expression frightening. Did you say she went to the western end? Yes, Your Majesty. Without daring to lift her head, the nymph born among the waves answered. With a livid face, Poseidon didn't possess the ability, like his brothers, to hide his joy and anger. He immediately realized the foolish woman's thought. She probably heard of the warlike renown of the Titan Atlas and thus hid there. She likely thought he would nobly go there, turn away the Skyholder, and then she would begrudgingly accept his pursuit. But the fool probably never considered that if the three Hecatonchires and the deity they had just captured decided not to act out this play but felt insulted and erupted in battle, what consequences would be wrought. Most crucially, as long as Atlas was supporting the sky, he would be the only being able to wield divine power upon the earth. Just let her stay there, the damn fool. He said, one word at a time, and was about to leave, but Poseidon noticed the nymph's trembling body out of the corner of his eye. He casually dealt with this unlucky creature, then turned and left. He gave Amphitrite one last chance. In 3 months' time, he would randomly pick something to fetch her. If she agreed, then he would tolerate this once, and they would talk later. If she remained dissatisfied, then Poseidon felt he couldn't hold back anymore. In fact, he wanted to give in to his godhood's influence and indulge without restraint there and then. Come here. Surveying his surroundings, the Sea Emperor caught a fish of unknown species. In any case, it looked decent. Some time later, Poseidon finally calmed down. Go find Nereus first. See the daughter he's raised. Such a fool. She might as well stay in my palace as an ornament from now on. He snorted coldly as Poseidon took to the sky and headed for the southern sea. Mistakes had to be paid for, and rightly so. He could take the opportunity to demand a stretch of the sea from her. Chapter 165. The King of Humans. Are you saying that Poseidon has claimed the seas near the southern continent for himself? Atop Mount Olympus, Zeus listened to Iris, the goddess of rainbows' report, and found it somewhat amusing. It was meant to be a force to counter the Oceanides, yet Poseidon was thinking about how to convert his allies into his own domains. That was, unless they had no other choice. Had there been a chance, the first to stab him in the back would have been these children of the original sea god. Yes, your majesty. However, later on, I heard that the Sea Emperor sent a dolphin to find Lady Amphitrite, and eventually the two returned together. Iris responded. They held a wedding banquet, announcing their presence to the vast seas. The two of them came together, Zeus mused. He chose not to say the word in the middle, feeling that his earlier worries were truly unnecessary. 3 months ago, when Amphitrite arrived at the western part of the world, hiding at the foot of Atlas, there were already plenty of deities who began to mock the situation. Zeus felt some annoyance on Mount Olympus about this. Having enjoyed peace for only a few months, he did not want his temperamental brother to do something irrational, and thus quickly sent Iris to convey the message. But now, it appeared that even though the future Sea Emperor and Sea Empress were not very clever, Poseidon still understood some truths, which greatly relieved the divine king. There's nothing more for you to do here. With a wave of his hand, Zeus indicated that Iris could leave. The divine king, having received the reply, felt somewhat relieved and soon shifted his focus to other matters, such as Eurynome, the Oceanides. The matter of Métis was too difficult to conceal forever, and as her sister, Eurynome was well suited to temporarily replace her as the bridge for communication with the Oceanides. Moreover, her own godhood was insignificant, and it would be difficult for her to bear overly powerful offspring. A less powerful progeny was not only not a threat but also a boon to his expansion of the divine court. In this manner, as time passed day by day, the wounds from the turnover of the era were slowly healed. Until this day, in a place unnoticed by many deities, an existence that even Lane had nearly forgotten accidentally tapped into a power that was not his to wield. Bang! After hurling the several meters tall creature onto the ground, Cohen wiped away non-existent sweat from his brow. On his body were several charred marks, the damage inflicted by this beast. It was unique, possessing the means to manipulate light and certain elements, capable of healing itself and harming others. It was a momentary lapse of attention that allowed Cohen to be struck, leaving scars on his body. Fortunately, the Cohen of today was no longer the Cohen of the past. Over the years, he had gradually mastered some special abilities. He couldn't remember how long ago it was, perhaps decades or even centuries, but after personally laying to rest the last of the golden humanity, aside from himself, Cohen discovered a warm current within his body. At first it simply existed, Then later it could travel throughout his body, augmenting his physique and strength. Until this stage, Cohen had not paid much attention to it. After all, compared to the physique of the primeval human king, which was naturally close to transcendent, this augmentation was minimal. However, as time passed, this energy gradually extended beyond the body, imbuing handheld tools with power, which made many of Cohen's actions much easier and more convenient. Years went by, and the energy eventually could leave the body, possessing considerable destructive force. But once it reached this stage, it seemed to hit a plateau and did not evolve for a long time. But Cohen didn't care, nor did he have any reason to seek power. The Golden Human King simply continued as always, sweeping the temple and carving steels, alone in the Temple of Corolla at the foot of Mount Othrys, keeping the incorruptible corpses of the golden humanity buried underground for company. Until that day, when many deities flew around the Mount of the Gods, he saw a god calling himself Zeus challenge the divine king. Then he witnessed the thunder, the surging waves, the continuous illusions of heaven and earth, and the resounding collapse of the Mount of the Gods. Fortunately, the Mount of the Gods fell northwest, while the old dwelling of golden humanity was established in the east. After all, they were originally brought from Delphi in the eastern region. The greatest catastrophe was avoided, but the debris and dust from earthquakes and landslides buried everything nearby. The ground split open, and everything sank into the fissures, including Cohen himself, who crawled out from the ruins several days after the godly battle. At that moment, looking around, nothing familiar remained. It's time to eat. After lighting a fire, Cohen cut some meat from the carcass of a beast. Creating fire was another skill he had learned in dreams, though he had seldom used it before. After all, back then, with the blessings of the gods, the human settlement was surrounded by evergreen fruit trees, but now all that was gone. Sometimes, looking at the old soil long buried beneath the ground, Cohen would have one or two disrespectful thoughts. He didn't understand why the gods did this, why they fought each other, and created catastrophes. But in the end, perhaps out of habit, he convinced himself once more. The deities could not be wrong. It must be that he still didn't understand them completely. I need to get to work. I wonder how much longer I'll have to dig. After finishing the last bite of roast, Cohen extinguished the fire. Lately, the Golden Human King had been busy excavating the ruins. Although it was bound to be a lengthy project, his life was equally long. Especially after the end of that godly battle, he felt that under immense stimulation, he had finally broken through that barrier. The energy within him seemed to have undergone some mysterious changes, and though he didn't know what use it had yet, it was undoubtedly effective in digging. What's this? As Cohen prepared to leave, circling around the carcass of the beast, his peripheral vision suddenly caught something. It was a dark golden gel-like substance that shouldn't have existed, but was now slowly oozing from the chest of the beast. Cohen had never seen this thing before, but for some reason, his transformed body and energy faintly told him that it was both very good and very dangerous. After hesitating for a moment, Cohen finally stepped forward, intent on discovering what it actually was. As for danger, the golden humanity didn't fear death. Reaching out, Cohen touched the mysterious gel. However, the next moment, before he could react, the unknown substance directly merged into Cohen's body through the skin. A sense of intense heat and mixed information acted simultaneously on the Golden Human King's body and psyche, and a golden flame blazed up on him. Ah! Bang! Clutching his head with both hands, Cohen collapsed to the ground after uttering just one cry. His furrowed brows indicated he was still conscious, just devoid of control over his body. In the realm of the mind, he began to collide and contest with the influx of information from an unknown source. Chapter 166 Son of Light. At the center of the continent, by the ruins surrounding Mount Othrys, a remarkable transformation was unfolding within Cohen. Upon his body, flames of light inched across his flesh, searing it without causing the slightest damage. Instead, as the light passed, Cohen gained an affinity for positive energy and resistance to high temperatures. Even if his transcendent physique had not already been strong, he would have acquired an exceptional constitution. Likewise, it was the same with his lifespan. Were it not for the Golden Human King's lifespan already measured in 10,000 years, any ordinary being would have seen their life extended by hundreds of years at least. However, unlike the pure enhancement of his physical body, within the realm of the spirit, Cohen faced real trouble. He felt as if he was transforming into the sun, traversing the sky, everything in the starry vault recoiling before him. Yet, from the sun's perspective, everything he saw was firmly imprinted in his mind. Every minute, every second of transformation observed by the sun was forcibly remembered by Cohen. He felt as if he was starting to forget who he was. Human memory is inconsequentially meager compared to nature. There was no foundation for comparison. However, at a certain moment when he was about to completely lose himself, within the depths of Cohen's thoughts, the image of a stele he had once seen in a dream slowly emerged. It served like an anchor, staunchly securing his past memories and personality. The deluge of information from Becoming the Sun could not shake it in the slightest. Even as just an image, it could still reveal great power. Eventually, as the onslaught gradually subsided, Cohen awoke from this dreamlike scenario to find Lady Night's hem had enveloped the sky. Briefly bewildered, in the next moment, Cohen felt as if he understood something. Among the information that had been infused, beyond the useless parts, there were many useful things. Lying on the ground, he stretched out his hand, almost instinctively, and the stars converged to form a sphere of light that rose and illuminated everything around him. Control light, in Cohen's perception, the natural light seemed like a part of him, easy to direct and control at will. Even the light possessed different abilities. Some starlight had special effects, while other light could combine with ever-present particles in the air, becoming more violent or aiding in healing wounds. It seems to be a rather impressive thing. No wonder that beast became so much stronger all of a sudden. Taking a moment to recuperate, Cohen could feel he had gained many more abilities. But these were not the most pressing matters. Right now, he needed rest. Having just withstood such a mental onslaught, though he had persevered, he was extremely exhausted. Moreover, even though he had weathered the crucial moment, the forces affecting his spirit had quieted down considerably. They had not disappeared but were still present. Thank the Divine King's protection. Thank Her Highness Yvonne's benevolence and power. Murmuring in his heart, Cohen knew that if it were not for the shadow of the stele deep in his memory, he might have lost himself already, degenerating into an existence like that beast. Regrettably, he had no idea which deity the Divine King that Yvonne spoke of referred to, so he simply followed through with a prayer. Standing up, Cohen took another look at the carcass of the beast. While he had been hunting it, Cohen had been puzzled by the sudden appearance of this strange, indiscriminate beast that attacked everything and could control light. Now it all became clear. It was probably due to that unknown gelatinous substance, yet the beast hadn't survived. It lost itself in madness, but at the same time, it had become stronger through the mysterious substance's transformation. That side seems more suitable. The night was deep, and Cohen walked toward the distance, discerning his directions by the stars. The following day, leaning against a broken circular pillar, Cohen woke up from his slumber. The sun was high in the sky, but in reality it was morning because in recent years the sun had not moved at all. In chaos, the dominions of the ancient gods of eternal night and lightless actually pulsed like the tides. When their power rose from beneath the ground, the sun would be obscured, and night would come. The initial division of day and night was like this, since in the beginning of creation, there was no sun. So, there hadn't been dawn or dusk for some time. Just as when Hyperion was still around, the day would arrive, and the sun would directly shine upon the earth with its most intense light. Fortunately, the sun was somewhat weak now, so it didn't add any more burdens to the already disaster-prone climate. However, unlike before, now as Cohen gazed at the sun in the sky, he felt an innate sense of kinship along with repulsion. The former came from his newly acquired power, while the latter because the mental impact grew stronger under the sun. It seems that this thing is best integrated at night or even to find a way to block the light. If I had touched it in the evening, perhaps even my own will might have been able to hold on. While he still had a slight headache, after a night's rest, Cohen had recovered quite a bit. With the haphazard knowledge that had come to him inexplicably, he roughly figured out the abilities that the gelatinous substance had granted him. Immunity to high temperatures, control light, a peculiar panoramic vision, and influence over certain emotions. Even for the Cohen of today, these were significant aids. He even faintly sensed that he could momentarily transform into a miniature sun. But intuition prevented him from trying. He had a premonition that if he dared to do so now, he might once again experience the feeling of nearly losing his self. Let's try the other abilities instead. Perhaps they can help me excavate the ruins. Following the information in his mind, Cohen raised his hand toward the distance. As the light fluctuated, a beam of light sliced through the air, piercing a small mountain that was over a dozen meters tall. The power is indeed substantial. Nodding, Cohen knew he could cause the same effect by exerting the energy that stemmed from his own body. However, this newly acquired special ability seemed to not consume his physical strength, which pleased him greatly. The progress of the excavation can be accelerated now. I wonder just how deep beneath the earth the Temple of Corolla is buried. Fortunately, with the protection of the Divine King, it must still be intact. He smiled and walked toward the distance. It was hard to say exactly why, but although he kept telling himself that excavating the temple was for the god, deep inside he couldn't deceive himself. In fact, Cohen felt he was doing it more for those beings buried in the ground, and for the stone tablets that documented their lives. But no matter the reason, finding the place was always the right move. So after eating a little, the Golden Human King continued with his work. Chapter 167 The Answer. With the aid of light, Cohen's work sped up considerably. Not only did the speed of his digging double, but he also had a sense of direction underground. This was a great help to his work, allowing him to avoid constantly recalibrating his position, and instead, he continuously dug a diagonal corridor thousands of kilometers long. In theory, such unsupported holes are prone to collapse, but after all, this is a mythic world, and the site of the Mount of the Gods is extraordinary. So, as Cohen dug downward, he encountered no accidents along the way. During the excavation, in order to obtain food, Cohen also hunted beasts multiple times. Gradually, he found that creatures like the giant beast he encountered before were not uncommon. These beasts that suddenly gained strength were not the only ones. Even plants were among them. Some were strong, others weak, and their abilities varied. A few had reason and knew how to seek advantages and avoid dangers, but many more seemed to have their sanity destroyed, becoming extremely crazy. After Cohen hunted them down one by one, he found similar special substances in the bodies of the animals. Undoubtedly, this miraculous stuff was the source of all the changes. However, Cohen did not continue to merge them, even though they seemed much weaker than what he had obtained before. He kept them in golden boxes, as Cohen discovered that the substances had a strong propensity for fusion, yet seemed to have no reaction to gold. Truly the root of calamity. Shaking his head slightly, although he had yet to emerge from underground at that time, Cohen had roughly figured out what had happened. One day after the War of the Gods, many streaks of light fell from the sky, landing on the earth. Since then, these things had started to appear. This was told to him by a flower elf he encountered, whose homeland was destroyed in the previous disaster, but she had used her own power to protect her essence. However, according to her, the spring elves weren't so lucky. As fellow nymphs, their essences were immovable. Cohen had rescued this flower elf from the clutches of a mad giant eagle. To kill this strange beast, he was even slightly injured. Heaven sent fire raining down. I hope the world can recover peace soon. He sighed and stood at the bottom of the tunnel, lifted his pickaxe, wrapped in his own energy, and struck downward again. He had been doing this every day, and today was no exception. But unexpectedly, his strike hit empty space this time, nearly causing him to lose his balance. In front of him, through the cracks he had chiseled, a vast hollow space appeared. Is this it? Feeling somewhat surprised, and facing the dark, lightless underground space, Cohen's eyes turned gold. Under that special power, it seemed as though he had changed perspectives, minutely observing his surroundings from a bird's-eye view. Soon, through the cracks, Cohen saw a scene at the bottom of the hollow space below. It was a cavity that had naturally formed from the subsidence of the earth, possibly under the protection of divine power. There were collapsed houses and shattered trees, but these were not his concern. It was only in the central position that Cohen discovered his target. That was the Temple of Korola. It was a bit far, and even his extraordinary abilities couldn't make it out clearly. Nevertheless, Cohen felt that the shape of the temple was somewhat strange. It seemed to not be in perfect condition.
Impossible.
Muttering to himself, his right hand tightened unconsciously, and the pickaxe he was holding began to deform, emitting a creaking noise. It must be an issue with the lighting. He reassured himself quietly. It was impossible to see clearly here, so Cohen used his hands to break away the remaining rubble and then leaped down. After a full 10 seconds or so, Cohen landed on the ground. This underground hollow was hundreds of meters high, causing him to create a not-so-small crater upon landing. The environment around him was both familiar and strange, with its past appearance completely changed. After landing, Cohen proceeded along the cracked path. The scattered surroundings seemed to disclose to any visitor what had happened here, giving him an ominous premonition. The further he went, the slower he became. After nearly half a day, Cohen finally crossed the last barrier and reached the vicinity of the once grand and towering Temple of Korola. There was nothing obstructing his view now. The full size of the temple could be directly seen. However, as he passed over the fallen giant rocks, Cohen just stood there, stunned in his place, gazing at the scene in the distance. Why? Why would it be like this? Where is the power of the gods? He cried out, even though a war among the gods had erupted before and shook the surrounding area underground. Cohen never doubted the safety of this place. The temple had been blessed by the power of the divine king since the day it was built. The great Cronus himself had proclaimed that as long as he was in this world, nothing could harm it. The Temple of Korola would stand with the world forever, eternally enduring. But now it had collapsed. Although the main structure was still there, anyone could see its dilapidation. The broken columns seemed to silently convey a message, as if the promises of the past were just like nothingness. No, what about the steel forest? Realizing something at that instant, if even the temple had collapsed, how could the place where the golden humanity was buried down below possibly remain intact? Cohen immediately ran to the open ground in front of the temple, as if he had forgotten that he could directly see that place. Eventually, when he arrived at the entrance of the monumental structure, what presented before him were only ruins strewn everywhere, toppled steels, and a few cracked but empty tombs. Nothing was left. Everything was just like a dream. They're all gone. Why? But where are their bodies? Where did they go? An invisible shockwave exploded around Cohen as he clenched his fists. How could the bodies of the golden humanity, which do not decay for 1,000 years after death, just disappear without a trace? He frantically uncovered every place where there should have been buried corpses, turning over grave after grave, yet what faced him was disappointment after disappointment. It was as if they had never existed, and everything in the past was an illusion. The human king did not know that when Mother Earth exerted all her might through the scepter, all objects with energy existing within the ground around Mount of the Gods had been stripped of their power. And what could be a finer nourishment than the divine blood and prime liquid contained within the bodies of the golden humanity? Without strength, a body is but an empty shell. With just a slight vibration, the remains of the golden humanity crumbled into dust, returning to their original form. After all, humans were created from soil and stone. And the temple, yes, the deities will answer me. Turning over the last grave, which was that of his once friend Hua, Cohen stood in a daze for a long time, finally remembering the ruined building in the distance. He ran to the temple, roughly pushing open the decayed doors and bursting into the inner sanctuary where the divine king was worshipped. Cohen gazed at the central position. There should have been a towering colossus holding a scepter, 100 meters tall, instilling awe in all who saw it. But now it was empty. Plunk. After a long silence, like someone devoid of strength, Cohen collapsed to the ground, momentarily stunned. He didn't know what to do, feeling that everything about himself was insignificant. Though in the past, when the golden humanity was still present, he often told others that the deities did not care for the humans' worship. Even if the deities chose to ignore them, that was a given, and they should still revere the deities above all else. But in truth, Cohen had harbored doubts, quickly suppressing those thoughts. He was more whole, so he was the only one who would question. The reason he said that was just because everyone else thought the same. Had it been any other golden humans, they wouldn't need to convince themselves that it was just a lack of understanding of the deities, for they never had doubts. But now Cohen felt he was mistaken. So the deity is no longer there. Or is it that the deity has abandoned us? Or perhaps they never existed in the first place. His voice was soft. Looking at the empty altar, Cohen couldn't help but doubt many things from before. Do the golden humans truly ascend to heaven to become heroic spirits after death, as Prometheus had told them? Cohen had never witnessed this himself. Are deities truly omnipotent? So where is the divine king now? The gods had promised that as long as they were worshipped, they would enjoy eternal happiness and peace. But why didn't he, so devout, feel any happiness at all? Cohen did not know. After all, in the past, he was merely a mortal. Everything he knew was bestowed upon him by the deities. Naturally, he wouldn't know what he shouldn't know. He had always believed in the greatness of the deities. But now, the once grand image in his heart had quietly collapsed without him knowing when. Or perhaps the cracks had always been there. As the golden human king who had seen the civilization steal, the innate constraints had never applied to him. What had restrained him in the past was only himself. Maybe I should take a look and see what the world is like. Whether it's as the deities said, or something else altogether. After a long silence, Cohen slowly stood up. He cast one last glance at the altar before walking out of the temple. As he passed through the clearing, Cohen looked at the scattered broken steels but didn't try to tidy them up, letting them remain strewn about. Steel exists to carry words. Words exist to depict history. History gives meaning to the beings that are buried within it. But if the traces of existence themselves have vanished, if everything they believed in was a lie, what value does such a record hold? The slates are no longer needed. His very existence is the past of the golden humanity. Light emerged, gently lifting Cohen's body as he floated up. He went to the spot where he had previously jumped down and stood firm. After one last look back at the cave, desolate, ruined, silent. This was the last remnant of a destroyed civilization. I will return. I definitely will. Once I find the answers. Turning away, Cohen covered the cave before departing without a second glance. With his departure, the relics of ancient times once again returned to darkness and silence.
Chapter 168 Mai 8.
No god knew that on this day, the last remnants of golden humanity left the heart of the continent and headed east. Of course, even if they knew, probably no deity would care, since it was, after all, just a remnant of an old era. Moreover, given the vastness of the continent, the complexity of its geography, the chaotic phenomena caused by the many godly battles, and the beasts tainted with divine blood, a mortal would probably never see what the sea looked like if they traveled on foot, even if it took them 1,000 years. By comparison, it was an angel from the spirit realm who had glanced at the outer world. For someone had called their name, imbued with a strong force known as faith by the master. Faith had always existed among the humans, wraiths, and the living beings of the spirit realm. It was only a question of how much. In the past, the faith that Yvain had received from the beings of the spirit realm when she went out occasionally was so minor that it was hard to notice without foreknowledge. But this call was different. Pure and powerful, if there were more people like this, even the weaker true gods could gain a level of divine power. However, even so, Yvain only took a glance. On one hand, The object of the faith didn't seem to be her, and on the other hand, she didn't care. Compiling hymns to praise the Creator in her own palace was far more meaningful than that bit of power. At least in this regard, Yvain very much agreed with Lyanna's viewpoint. There was nothing worth paying attention to in the outer world, a bunch of beings who did not worship the Master, all born sinful. Meanwhile, outside the spirit realm, the scattered divine fragments of Hyperion did attract quite a bit of attention. After all, ever since the fragments spread across the world, countless beings have merged with them. There were animals, plants, and even elves like the nymphs. Some received smaller fragments, yielding less power and only a weak impact on the spirit. Some received larger fragments, stronger even than koans, but often ended up losing themselves and becoming monsters. But these only caused a little concern, as the gods really hadn't reacted much, since it had been a long time since any deity had set foot in the mortal realm. Moreover, once the Divine King had noticed this situation, he quickly spoke about it, claiming it was a consequence of the fall of the sun. Thus, the gods let it be. After all, it was just a power that could hardly match the deities. Time flowed gently, but on this day, in the 20th year of Zeus's reign, something difficult to say whether good or bad transpired. The Divine King and the Oceanid Eurynomy had, at some point, given birth to 3 daughters, much to everyone's surprise. This should have been cause for celebration, but the gods suddenly realized that the Divine King had not yet chosen a queen of gods, and Métis had been absent for many years. The gods couldn't help but secretly speculate what exactly had happened between the 2 Oceanid sisters. Why had the elder sister inexplicably disappeared, while the younger sister bore daughters to the Divine King? But in the end, this was the Divine King's private affair, so despite the many rumors, no one spoke out. On Mount Olympus, the bedchamber of the Divine King. Your Highness, MHM. Zeus nodded to the 2 nymphs at the door and Themis walked directly into the great hall. Perhaps it was due to the presence of new gods, but as soon as she stepped through the door, an air of joy and pleasantry hit her face. This force tried to influence the goddess of justice's heart, but to no avail, for law and fairness were precisely the anathema to such trickery. In the Third Era, the birth of deities rarely caused widespread phenomena, but still there were some influences brought about by the bestowed godhoods. Undoubtedly, the new true gods here presided over domains related to joy, grace, and inspiration, among others, but before meeting them, Themis still couldn't determine whether it was one or several deities holding these domains separately. If it were the former, then it was likely another being with extraordinary divine power. You've come, my lady. It has been a while since I last saw you. How goes the work on the new laws for the divine court? Perceiving the goddess of justice's unmistakable presence, the Divine King smiled and stepped out from the inner chamber. There, the recently summoned goddess of nursery, Leto, was washing the newborns. Although he didn't know why his aunt had come at this time, Zeus still greeted her with a smile. It's almost done, but there are a few details to be addressed, and the current divine court is still far from perfect. Dressed in a golden robe with a sword hanging at her waist, Themis spoke calmly. But let's talk about you, Zeus. Is Eurynomy the new queen of gods you've chosen? That's not quite it. Shaking his head, the Divine King replied, You probably know well enough that her power is not sufficient to be the queen. At the very least, one must possess intermediate divine power or higher to avoid being ridiculed by the gods. She nodded lightly, knowing this to be true. After all, the previous 2 queen of gods had been goddesses with formidable divine power. It should be no exception for the 3rd generation. However, feeling the intense heat from the treasured sword at her waist, Themis remained silent for a moment before suddenly saying to Zeus, It is logical that the queen of gods should be a powerful deity. But Zeus, there have been deities with strong godhood who have offered their hearts to you in the past. Yet you have given them up. Métis once trusted you so much, and this is how you treated her. After all these years, do you ever feel regret? Startled, the voice of the goddess of law was quiet, yet it resonated like thunder. The Divine King almost lost control of his strength as he looked at the goddess before him, guessing what she had discovered. He thought he had never exposed such things. Not even the goddess of magic who divined for him knew what choice he had made. I don't understand what you mean, my lady. In fact, Métis was just 20 years ago. My sword told me you had committed an act against justice. I thought it related to something else, but ever since then, the goddess of wisdom has vanished without a trace. Interrupting her nephew's excuses, Themis was somewhat disappointed. But she should have known long ago, this is the way of the divine king. Even though she didn't know what it was, Zeus probably saw a threat in Métis. However, from this point of view, he is far inferior to Cronus of the past. I don't know what you did to her, but let's stop there. Don't let a calamity befall her sister again. Choose a queen of gods for your divine court as soon as possible, instead of continuing such wanton behavior. After giving Zeus one last look, the goddess turned away, unwilling to see his face any longer. This is not a threat, but rather a mandate of the current laws that the divine king should have, and only have one queen of gods. I do not set order based on likes and dislikes. I only inscribe the order itself into the codex, to be known to everyone. Perhaps she should, like in the first era, blind herself to avoid witnessing each deity's hidden sins under the divine authority of justice, yet unable to eradicate their roots. I won't disturb you further. I hope you consider my advice seriously. Themis moved away. Looking at the retreating figure of the goddess of justice, the divine king's countenance flickered with uncertainty. He truly regretted, not his treatment of Métis, but inviting such a discerning judge to the divine court. The sword of judgment, born of the authority of justice, had almost slipped his mind. It is difficult for any entity beneath greatness to alter such sensitivity, meaning that many of his deeds could be linked to him, even if she was unaware of the process. But now that she had arrived, invited by him as the guardian of vows, Zeus had no room for regret if he did not wish to break his own promises. Queen of gods, well, it's about time. Demeter, her vitality complements the destruction of my thunderbolt arrow. Though she seems uninterested, there is also Hera, who received a portion of the divine authority of fertility from Mother Earth. With her, perhaps I could manually influence the strength of my offspring. His gaze flickering, Zeus was not yet resolute, and the events of the day indeed took him by surprise, leaving him somewhat flustered. Even before he committed the act, he knew it couldn't be concealed forever since deities are immortal. He could feel the embryo of a baby girl, already conceived within him, drawing nourishment and growing robustly. From a certain perspective, she might well be considered his eldest daughter. But he was prepared if this daughter showed even a hint of hostility toward him at birth. He would surely not spare her. Your Majesty, it has been accomplished. Then, from behind the palace, the voice of the goddess of nursery came. In the intervening time, 3 newly born infants had been placed in swaddling clothes. That is indeed wonderful. Trying to muster a smile, Zeus temporarily set aside his concerns and turned to enter the rear, ready to see his 3 daughters and the goddess who had been summoned. The 3 Graces, Aglaea, Euphrosyne, and Talia, who respectively preside over grace and magnificence, joy and festivities, encouragement and banquet enjoyment. They were destined not to excel in combat, but they could adorn the divine king's court. Leto, thank you for your hard work, and thank you for your willingness to come and assist. It's just a pity that your noble parents, dwelling on the edge of the starry sky, choose not to meddle in worldly affairs. Otherwise, I would have given them the highest respect and glory. Looking at Leto in black attire, her appearance among the deities was actually unremarkable, even less so compared to her sister, the star goddess Asteria. Yet, as the daughter of 2 mighty titans, Zeus could not ignore her presence regardless. Thus, upon entering the inner chamber, the divine king warmly took her hands, even forgetting the 3 children by his side. After the divine war, the whereabouts of the Mother of Light remained unknown, a constant concern in Zeus's heart. But if he could win over the deity of the lightless celestial bodies, it would be a considerable aid. Chapter 169 Advice from the Afterthinker. The words of the goddess of justice were indeed effective, and after hosting a banquet for his 3 daughters, the divine king left Olympus. He intended to meet the 2 goddesses who were nominally his sisters but in reality were not as old as he was. In the past, whether it was Mother Earth or Rhea, they had not left a good impression on Zeus, who now reigned as the divine king. He needed a queen of gods, but not one like those 2. She should prioritize the interests of the divine king over anything else. So he decided to spend some time observing them to find out what kind of deities they truly were. Thus, the divine king moved between the mount of the gods and the sea, and long-forgotten humans walked upon the earth. A high tower was erected in the moon, and the chaotic meteorology began to settle down. Until this day, when the divine king, satisfied, returned to Olympus, and the son of Iapetus, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, suddenly came to see him. "Your Majesty, I have completed the task as entrusted," Prometheus said, looking somewhat weary but with a spirited gleam in his eyes. Over the years, he had sought out his brother, and together they had created many forms of life. Even without Iapetus' assistance, the 2 of them had been very successful. Now, feeling that all was ready, the forethinker thought it time to create humans. "Very well, Prometheus, you've been a bit quicker than I expected," Zeus said, nodding with satisfaction. In fact, the divine king had been growing somewhat impatient of late. He desired greater power, preferably before Gaia awoke and Oceanus recovered, but he had not the slightest clue how to achieve it. Whenever he faced difficulties, Zeus would think of his father. If he possessed that kind of power, there probably would have been nothing to worry about. Therefore, when Prometheus told him he was ready, Zeus was very pleased. "Go, son of Iapetus. Use the materials I have given you to create a new humanity. Whatever the outcome, please inform me immediately after your completion. I will be waiting on Mount Olympus to reward you." Perhaps because fate had been twisted, Athena, who was supposed to participate in the creation of humans, had not yet been born. She would likely miss this event. However, the creation of humans did not require the participation of the goddess of wisdom, just as Gaia had created the silver humanity. Even in the myths of later ages that speak of the 5 ages of humans, only one age of humans was imbued with breath by the goddess of wisdom, but this did not prevent the humans of other ages from being capable of thought. "As you wish, Your Majesty, I will do my best," Prometheus replied. After receiving his orders, he quickly departed, not just on the command of the divine king, but also because he himself desired to do so. He soon left Mount Olympus and immediately sought out his brother. He had told him to wait here because the forethinker had sensed the divine king's unnaturally fervent interest in humans. He predicted Zeus's response, and although unclear about the reasons, he knew he would not stay long in Olympus. "Epimetheus, my brother, we can finally begin," Prometheus said as they stood on a plain near a river and forest. "Just as we have tried before, I will bestow life upon the body, you will grant the body potential, and as for the soul, we can only hope for their own luck. In this way, each human will have their own strengths, and it will also be easier for me to remember them," he instructed. Although they were brothers, they had always acted more like a follower and a leader. The wise forethinker made decisions while the foolish afterthinker followed and executed them. It had always been so. "But brother, why do you want to remember them?" the afterthinker asked blankly as if being awakened by his elder. "All beings must die at some point, and humans, despite their wisdom, are no exception. Even if you remember each one of them, they won't be able to accompany you for very long," he said. "I created them, so I must take responsibility for them, even if they will die just the same." There was a silence before Prometheus explained this way. "But we have also created many forms of life before, birds, fish. Some were created with father, others in recent years that we've tried creating, yet you never cared about them this much." As if oblivious to his elder brother's mood, Epimetheus continued to ask. An even longer silence followed. These words seemed to accuse him of favoritism, but Prometheus didn't blame his brother. He was always so foolish, and it was reasonable for him to ask such ill-timed questions. Yet, as reasonable as it was, He was truly at a loss for what to say. In his heart of hearts, Prometheus knew why he favored humans so much. Among the deities, the forethinker was never renowned for his strength. His only reliance was his wisdom. Among all creatures, humans were also never known for their strength. Their sole distinction was having a thought process similar to that of the gods. Every life form has its biases, and the forethinker was no exception. The reason he cared so much for humanity was really just because he saw another version of himself. If someone else had made humans, they would be just similar at best. But if he himself was creating them, it was as if they weren't just ordinary beings he created but children without blood ties of his own. Just do as I say, Epimetheus. I am Prometheus, the forethinker, the sage unanimously recognized by the gods. The things I'm determined to do, naturally, will be free of mistakes. Now get ready. Together, we shall fulfill the divine king's command. Speaking curtly, Prometheus did not wish to voice his thoughts, even if the other was his own brother. He turned away, not paying any more attention to his brother, but began to mold the bodies of the humans. Behind him, the afterthinker watched his elder brother with a hint of regret. He couldn't see the future, nor did he know what humans ultimately represented, but past experience told him that no matter how much emotion Prometheus invested, it wouldn't yield a good result. After all, the newly enthroned divine king wouldn't want to create humans without reason. What the divine king dedicated himself to was naturally only power. Perhaps humans bore some special value that was unknown to them at present. But no matter what that value was, once humans were created, there were only two possibilities. If they were useful, then the divine king would consider them a forbidden delicacy, to be shared at most with other powerful deities. If they were useless, then in order to continue his experiment, the divine king would only start over anew. Thus, pouring emotions into something that was doomed not to be one's own naturally wouldn't lead to a good outcome. It was inevitable. What are you standing there for? Come here now? Seeing his brother spacing out, Prometheus scolded. Right, I'm coming. Shaking his head, Epimetheus moved forward as instructed. Divine power lit up in his hands, and in the end, he decided to do as he always did, to follow Prometheus's requests. He had tried to persuade Atlas in the past because he felt no god could forever be the divine king, but Atlas had scoffed at the notion. Now, he was attempting to persuade his own brother, but again to no avail. Luckily, the deities were immortal, so Epimetheus accepted this calmly. Perhaps after they had gone through enough, they would no longer do this. Only by suffering losses does one learn the lesson. It goes for both gods and humans. Chapter 170 Bronze. On a nameless plane, using the remnants of the old era, a new humanity was slowly crafted. Although he was a witness, Prometheus didn't notice at all what the material the divine king had sent was made of. After all, he had only ever handled the parts for making birds and beasts, and the portion used to create silver humanity had never been touched by others, as Mother Earth did not allow it. With his brother's help, Prometheus's movements became swift. In just a few moments he shaped a human. Epimetheus followed behind, endowing them with different potentials. Some had extraordinary strength, others had keen observation, and some had swift reactions. Per the forethinker's request, each one was unique, possessing their own strengths that were memorable. In the end, when humanity spread across the earth, several months had passed. Prometheus lifted a small bottle which was sent by the divine king, the origin of life liquid extracted from who knows where. Truly a perfect creation. May the respected Lord of the spirit realm grant you equally perfect souls. In silent prayer, the forethinker turned the liquid into rain, sprinkling it upon the beings before him. In the silent transition, when the bodies of humans gained vitality, Samsara sensed the birth of new life and voluntarily provided the initial souls. However, unlike other life currently, since humans were made by a deity and not bred naturally, their souls were naturally not arranged by the spring and renewal of Ononia. As Samsara turned, a new seed of the soul descended, and just like golden and silver humanity, this third generation possessed consciousness, without past lives. They were their own original beginning. The first generation is golden humanity, the second is silver humanity, you are the third. Bronze humanity is your name. Watching his creation open their eyes before him, Prometheus felt a heartfelt joy. It was not the emotion of a creator towards their creation, but more like a father's affection for his child. I am your creator, son of the Titan god Iapetus, the forethinker Prometheus. Looking at the confused eyes of bronze humanity, he said loudly, I have already given you language and awareness of the world. I, by the command of the Lord of Olympus, King Zeus, have created you. What is this? What is this? Before he could finish his sentence, almost in unison, Prometheus and his brother at his side exclaimed in surprise. Just now, at the moment when humanity opened their eyes and saw them, both deities suddenly felt a force entwined around their bodies. In the past, they had also felt it from golden humanity. But at that time, they were newly born, and their divine power was far from reaching the limit of godhood, so they didn't pay attention to this weak force, as the enhancement it provided was not as strong as their natural growth in divine power as true gods. But now it was different. Their divine power had long reached its limit. Yet for perhaps the first time, what was meant to be stagnant power due to the boundary of godhood seemed to pulse, advancing an imperceptible fraction. No change in godhood itself, no shift in the strength of authority, but still an increase in divine power, an occurrence that was previously impossible. Feeling this change, Prometheus realized something astonishing. Thinking of Zeus's peculiar enthusiasm for humans, it was as if he understood. So this is why the divine king had me create humans. I can't believe I didn't notice this power before. First surprise, then delight. Prometheus was joyful not only about the increase in power but also about the future of his creation. He had listened to Epimetheus's words before. All things must come to an end, humans are destined to perish, but now the existence of humans had value, so naturally, the deities would not let them die off. Perhaps soon, King Zeus would have him create females, perpetuating the bronze humanity forever. And his own creations would thereby become immortal alongside the deity race. Brother, they seem to worship you a lot. His reverie was interrupted. Prometheus frowned and turned to his brother beside him. Indeed, the newly created humans were prostrating on the ground, worshipping the deity that created them. For them, everything was their first encounter with the world. The sun above, the earth beneath their feet, and the deity before them all inspired an innate reverence within them. There's nothing odd about that. It's said that the same thing happened when golden humanity was born. That's only natural, Epimetheus. Since I am their creator, of course they will worship me. It's a perfectly normal affair. Now, you stay here and protect them. I have to report back to King Zeus. With a wave of his hand, his younger brother seemed like he wanted to say something, but the forethinker paid no mind. First, he promised the newly born bronze humanity that he would return soon. Then he soared into the sky, flying towards Mount Olympus. The transmission of faith knows no bounds. It may diminish or be reduced, but once faith is spawned, believers can receive it from anywhere. So when bronze humanity was born, this formless faith was transmitted outward. On Olympus, above the vast seas in the underworld within the spirit realm, more than one existence took notice. They all had one thing in common. They had reached the upper limit of divine power allowed by their godhood, and had more or less association with humans. Some, like King Zeus, granted humans the right to exist. Others, like Mother Earth, provided humans with a land to live on. Still others were like the sun, whose light was indispensable to humans, or, as common sense, were directly imparted to humans by Prometheus upon their creation. In any case, when they sensed an unnatural change in divine power, almost all deities were shocked. The reverence of creatures could elevate divine power. This was actually perceived by some gods long ago. However, during the Golden Age, the twisted souls of humanity produced only negligible faith, not even matching the pace at which the divine power of deities naturally increased over time, so this was overlooked by the gods. They thought it might, at best, speed up the rate at which their divine power reached its limit, but not break through it. Cronus, the only one who might have realized this, paid no attention either, since King Zeus's authority far exceeded his weakened temporal divine authority. But now things were different. An era had passed, the vast majority of deities had reached their peak, and the faith of the new humans was 100-fold greater than before. They noticed this almost instantly. Their divine power, long unchanged, had miraculously increased a bit. Ha ha ha! I see now. Atop Mount Olympus, in the empty grand hall, King Zeus laughed heartily. Unlike other deities still searching for the source of the change, he had directly pinpointed the bronze humanity he'd been observing for a long time. In this moment, as he felt that wondrous power flowing towards him, he believed he'd finally deciphered the secret of Father God's strength. I see now. I finally understood. Unfortunately, I didn't realize this sooner. Otherwise, I would have never let Prometheus teach these humans about the existence of other deities. After some time, King Zeus collected himself. He pondered for a moment, then called out loudly, "Iris, your majesty, what are your commands?" The goddess of rainbow, straddling the light, listened respectfully. "Extend an invitation to my two brothers. Tell them that this creation born from my command, this is our shared fruit, but it is also exclusively the fruit of Olympus. Go and deliver the message as it is." Seeing the goddess of rainbow's puzzled look, King Zeus had no intention of explaining. Instead, he waved her off to carry out the task. It was normal for her not to realize it. The forethinker had only granted his creation the most basic knowledge, including the powerful divine forces of Olympus, and the most fundamental language and script. All other content Prometheus had planned to teach humans himself in the days to come, but now he had saved King Zeus a great deal of trouble. There are two sources of faith: knowledge with worship or integral parts of life, becoming part of civilization, culture, and history. Zeus's two brothers belonged to the former, the sun god, moon god along with King Zeus, and Mother Earth to the latter, all of whom received faith. But the goddess of rainbow did not. Just like Zeus's foster parents far out at sea, since none of the criteria were met, there was naturally no response whatsoever.